The elevator doors slid open, and Evan Cole's world stopped. Vivian Cross didn't look up from her desk. She never did, but her voice cut through the silence like ice cracking under pressure. "Sit down, Mr. Cole. We need to discuss your future." Evan's hands trembled as he clutched the eviction notice in his pocket. He'd prepared himself for termination, rehearsed apologies for the accounting errors that weren't his fault. What he wasn't prepared for was her next sentence. "I need a husband. 1 year. In exchange, I'll erase every debt you have." The words hung in the air like a noose, or a lifeline. Before we begin, if you love stories about unexpected chances and forbidden feelings, hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Now, let's dive into Evan's impossible choice. The fluorescent lights in the accounting department buzzed like dying insects, a soundtrack Evan Cole had grown to hate over the past 18 months. He sat hunched over his desk, squinting at spreadsheets that blurred together after 12 straight hours of work. The numbers didn't lie, but they didn't tell the whole truth either. Someone had been cooking the books, and somehow the trail led straight to his terminal. His phone vibrated for the 4th time in an hour. Evan didn't need to check it. The landlord's name would be flashing across the screen again, probably with another threat about the locks being changed if he didn't come up with 3 months back rent by Friday. That was 2 days away. 2 days, and he had exactly $73 in his checking account. "Mr. Cole," Evan's head snapped up. Margaret Chen from HR stood beside his cubicle, her expression carefully neutral in that way that meant bad news dressed up as professionalism. "Ms. Cross would like to see you in her office. Immediately." His stomach dropped. Vivian Cross. The Vivian Cross, CEO of Cross Industries, the woman whose name appeared in business journals next to words like ruthless and uncompromising, wanted to see him. A junior accountant who'd been flagged in an internal audit. This was it. This was how it ended. "I'll be right up," Evan managed, his voice steadier than he felt. Margaret's expression softened just slightly. "Good luck." The walk to the executive elevator felt like a death march. Evan caught sight of his reflection in the polished steel doors. 32 years old, but looking 40. His cheap suit wrinkled from too many wears between dry cleanings he couldn't afford. Dark circles under his eyes from nights spent either working or worrying. He looked exactly like what he was, a man barely holding on. The elevator climbed 43 floors in silence. With each ascending number, Evan's mind raced through possibilities, none of them good. Security would probably escort him out. They'd keep his last paycheck to cover the damages from the audit irregularities. He'd have to call Sarah's school, explain why he couldn't pick her up, beg his ex-wife's mother to keep her for a few more days while he figured out. The doors opened directly into the executive suite. Evan had never been to this floor. Few people had. The reception area alone was larger than his entire apartment, all glass and steel and carefully curated art that probably cost more than he'd earn in a lifetime. A woman at the reception desk, her nameplate read Jessica, gestured toward a set of double doors without looking up from her computer. "She's expecting you." Evan's hand shook as he knocked. "Come in." Her voice was exactly as he remembered from the company-wide meetings. Crisp, controlled, utterly devoid of warmth. He pushed open the door and stepped into Vivian Cross's office. The space was breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, the afternoon sun casting everything in sharp relief. But Evan barely noticed the view. His attention locked on the woman behind the massive desk, her fingers steepled beneath her chin, her dark eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made his skin prickle. Vivian Cross was 41, though she could have passed for 35. Her black hair was pulled back in a severe bun, not a strand out of place. She wore a slate gray suit that probably cost more than his car, back when he'd had a car. Everything about her screamed control, from her perfectly manicured nails to the way she held herself utterly still, like a predator deciding whether prey was worth the chase. "Sit down, Mr. Cole." Evan sat. The chair was uncomfortably modern, all angles and no cushion. "Do you know why you're here?" she asked. "I assume it's about the audit." He forced himself to meet her gaze. "I didn't falsify those reports. Someone used my login, my access codes. I've been trying to trace the real source, but..." She held up one hand, cutting him off. "I know you didn't do it." Evan blinked. You What? Marcus Chen, my half-brother and the CFO, has been embezzling funds through various junior-level accounts for the past 8 months. Yours was one of several he compromised. She said it matter-of-factly, as if discussing the weather. He's been very clever about it, almost clever enough. Then why? Because I haven't moved against him yet, Vivian continued, her tone suggesting this should be obvious. Moving against Marcus requires leverage I don't currently possess. He has the board's ear, particularly my mother's. She controls the majority voting shares through a trust. If I accuse Marcus without ironclad proof, he'll twist it into paranoia, paint me as unstable. The company will fracture. Evan's head spun. I don't understand. If you know I'm innocent, why am I here? For the first time, something flickered across Vivian's face. Not quite emotion, but a crack in the perfect mask. Because you're desperate, Mr. Cole. And I need someone desperate. The words landed like a punch. Evan's jaw tightened. Excuse me? You're 3 months behind on rent, Vivian said, pulling out a folder and sliding it across the desk. Your daughter's school has sent 5 notices about unpaid tuition. You have $18,000 in credit card debt, most of it medical bills from your daughter's treatment last year. Your ex-wife is threatening to file for full custody based on your financial instability. Your car was repossessed 2 weeks ago. You're drowning, Mr. Cole, and I'm offering you a lifeline. Evan stared at the folder without touching it. His entire life reduced to a series of failures on paper. How do you... I make it my business to know things, Vivian interrupted. Especially about people who might be useful to me. Useful. The word tasted bitter. What exactly do you want from me? Vivian stood, moving to the window with fluid grace. With the light behind her, she became a silhouette, sharp and untouchable. I need a husband, Mr. Cole, for 1 year. A marriage that looks real enough to satisfy certain legal requirements and personal obligations. Evan's mouth went dry. I'm sorry, what? My father's will contains a rather archaic provision, Vivian said, still facing the window. In order to maintain full control of Cross Industries, I must be married by my 42nd birthday. He believed that marriage indicated stability, maturity, commitment, all the things he felt I lacked. Her voice remained perfectly level, but Evan caught the razor's edge of anger beneath. That birthday is in 6 months. If I'm not married by then, controlling interest passes to a board committee, a committee Marcus has spent years positioning himself to dominate. Can't you just find someone? Evan asked, his mind reeling. Someone from your, your social circle? Vivian turned to face him. Everyone in my social circle wants something. Power, money, access. A marriage to any of them would create complications that would take years to untangle. I need something clean, simple, transactional. She crossed her arms. I need someone who has everything to gain and nothing I want. That's... Evan couldn't find words adequate to the insult. Honest, Vivian finished. That's honest, Mr. Cole. You're not part of my world. You have no connections, no leverage, no hidden agenda. You're simply a man in a desperate situation who needs financial security. I can provide that. In exchange, you provide me with the legal status I require. Evan stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. I may be broke, Ms. Cross, but I'm not for sale. Everyone is for sale, Mr. Cole. The only question is price. She returned to her desk, pulling out another folder. Here's mine. $1 million placed in a trust for your daughter's education and health care. All your debts cleared, every single one. A residence in my penthouse for the year's duration with a private suite for you and your daughter. A new position in the company with a salary of $200,000 annually, full benefits. Evan's legs went weak. $1 million, Sarah's future secured. No more collection calls. No more fear of losing her. No more lying awake calculating how many meals he could skip to afford her medication. After the year ends, Vivian continued, we file for a quiet divorce. You walk away with another $1 million, plus continued employment if you wish it. You'll have everything you need to build a stable life for your daughter. All I need is your name on a marriage certificate and your presence at my side for 12 months. Why? Evan demanded, his voice rough. Why me? Out of everyone you could have chosen, why a junior accountant you could fire without a second thought? Vivian's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. Because you have something most people in my life lack, Mr. Cole. Integrity. You didn't steal that money even when you were desperate enough to consider it. Yes, I know you considered it. You work yourself to exhaustion to provide for your daughter. You haven't missed a single one of her doctor's appointments despite the demands of this job. You're exactly the kind of man who would honor a contract even when it costs you. She leaned forward. And that's what I need. Someone who keeps his word. Evan sank back into the chair. His mind spun through the implications. A year of his life. A marriage without love, without real connection. Lying to everyone. His daughter, his family, the world. Playing house with a woman who saw him as a convenient solution to a problem. But Sarah would be safe. She could go to any college she wanted. She'd never have to worry about money for her treatments, never have to hear him explain why they couldn't afford something she needed. What about Sarah? He asked quietly. What do I tell her? The truth, if you choose, or a simplified version of it. Children are more adaptable than adults give them credit for. Vivian's expression softened almost imperceptibly. I have no intention of interfering with your parenting, Mr. Cole. This arrangement is about paperwork and appearances, nothing more. Your daughter's well-being is entirely your domain. And if someone finds out, if the truth comes out, then we deal with it together, Vivian said. But I'm very good at controlling narratives, Mr. Cole. As long as you follow the terms of our agreement, there's no reason anyone would suspect. Evan looked down at his hands. Calloused from the manual labor jobs he'd worked before landing this position. Scarred from the years when he'd been someone different. Someone who'd had choices. What are the terms exactly? Vivian slid a thick document across the desk. It's all spelled out here. You'll need to review it with a lawyer. I'll provide one at my expense if you don't have representation. But the essential points are simple. We marry within the month. You move into my penthouse. We maintain the appearance of a genuine relationship in public. In private, we lead separate lives with mutual respect for boundaries. No infidelity that could become public. No disclosure of the arrangement's true nature. At the end of 1 year, we divorce quietly and part ways. Separate lives, Evan repeated. So this is, what? We're roommates who happen to be legally married? Essentially. Vivian's tone was matter-of-fact. I'll respect your privacy and expect the same in return. We'll coordinate schedules for public appearances, charity events, business dinners, the occasional family obligation. Beyond that, you're free to live as you choose within the bounds of discretion. Evan picked up the contract, the paper heavy in his hands. It felt like holding the weight of a decision that would define the rest of his life. Can I think about it? You have until tomorrow morning, Vivian said. After that, I'll need to pursue other options. I don't have the luxury of time, Mr. Cole. Neither do you. She was right. Friday was 2 days away. The eviction notice was real. Sarah's school had already sent a letter saying they couldn't guarantee her place next year without payment. His ex-wife's lawyer had filed the custody motion 3 weeks ago. Time was a luxury he'd run out of months ago. I'll give you my answer tomorrow, Evan said, standing on shaky legs. 9 a.m. Don't be late. Vivian's attention had already shifted to her computer screen, dismissing him with the efficiency of someone who'd gotten what she needed from the conversation. Evan left the office in a daze. The elevator ride down felt surreal, as if he'd stepped out of reality and into some fever dream. A marriage contract, a year of his life. Financial security in exchange for what? His dignity? His sense of self? The hope that someday he might find real love again? He made it to his desk and collapsed into his chair, the contract burning like hot coals in his briefcase. Around him, the normal sounds of the office continued. Phones ringing, keyboards clicking, the low murmur of conversations. None of his co-workers knew that his entire world had just tilted on its axis. His phone buzzed. Another call from the landlord. Evan let it go to voicemail and pulled out his wallet instead, extracting the small photo he kept tucked behind his driver's license. Sarah, at 6 years old, grinning gap-toothed at the camera, her eyes bright with the kind of joy that made every struggle worth it. She was 8 now, and that joy had dimmed under the weight of their circumstances, the constant moving, the uncertainty, the nights when she pretended not to notice him skipping meals so she could eat. What kind of father was he if he let pride stop him from giving her the life she deserved? What kind of man was he if he sold himself to the highest bidder, even for the best reasons? The questions chased each other through his mind as he packed up his desk at 5 p.m., riding the public bus home to the cramped apartment that wouldn't be home much longer. The building was in one of the city's forgotten neighborhoods, where the rent was cheap because hope was cheaper. Graffiti covered the walls. The elevator had been broken for 3 months. Evan climbed the stairs to the 4th floor, his legs heavy with exhaustion and indecision. "Daddy!" Sarah's voice cut through his fog of worry like sunshine through clouds. She burst out of the neighbor's apartment, Mrs. Patterson, their godsend of a neighbor who watched Sarah after school, and launched herself into his arms. Evan caught her, spinning her around despite his fatigue. "Hey, princess, how was school?" "We learned about fractions." Sarah's enthusiasm was infectious. "And Mrs. Patterson made cookies. She saved you too." Evan hugged her tight, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. 8 years old and already too aware of their struggles, already learning to find joy in small things because the big things were always just out of reach. "Thank you, Mrs. Patterson," Evan called over Sarah's head. The elderly woman waved from her doorway. "Any time, honey. You look tired. Everything okay?" "Just a long day," Evan lied, the words coming easier than they should. "Come on, princess. Let's get dinner started." Their apartment was tiny, a one-bedroom where Sarah slept on a pull-out couch in the living room because Evan had given her the bedroom. The furniture was secondhand, the carpet stained, the windows overlooking a brick wall 3 feet away. But Sarah had decorated with drawings from school, and Evan had painted her favorite colors on the walls, and somehow they'd made it a home. While Sarah did her homework at their tiny kitchen table, Evan prepared dinner from what was left in the refrigerator. Pasta again. They'd been eating a lot of pasta lately. Sarah didn't complain, she never complained. But Evan saw how she looked at the school cafeteria menu, at the meals other kids brought in their lunch boxes. "Daddy?" Sarah's voice was small. "Jenny's mom said she's going to Disney World this summer." Evan's heart clenched. "That's nice, princess. Have you ever been to Disney World?" "A long time ago," Evan said, stirring the pot with more attention than it needed. "When I was a kid." "Do you think we could go sometime, maybe for my birthday?" Her birthday was in 3 months. Evan had been saving for a cake and a small gift, trying to scrape together enough to make it special. Disney World wasn't even in the same universe as possible. "Maybe someday," he said, hating himself for the lie. Sarah was quiet for a moment, then, "It's okay if we can't. I know money is tight." 8 years old and already making herself smaller to fit their circumstances. Evan turned off the stove and knelt down beside her chair, taking her small hands in his. "Hey, look at me." He waited until her brown eyes, so much like his own, met his. "You never have to worry about money. That's my job. Your job is to be a kid, to dream big, to want things. Don't ever make yourself smaller because of our situation, okay? Promise me." Sarah nodded, but Evan could see she didn't quite believe him. How could she? Words were cheap when reality kept proving them wrong. After dinner, after homework, after the bedtime routine they'd perfected over 3 years of doing this alone, Evan sat on his bed with Vivian's contract spread before him. The legal language was dense, but the meaning was clear enough. Sign away a year of his life. Pretend to love a woman who saw him as a means to an end. Live in a world that wasn't his, surrounded by luxury he'd never earned. And in exchange, Sarah would have everything: education, healthcare, stability, a chance at the life she deserved. His phone rang. Evan glanced at the screen. Jennifer, his ex-wife. He almost didn't answer, but calls from Jennifer were rare enough these days to mean something urgent. "Hello." "Evan, we need to talk about the custody hearing." Jennifer's voice was tight, stressed. They'd been divorced for 3 years, married for barely 2 before that. She'd remarried 18 months ago to a man who owned a chain of car dealerships and lived in a house with a pool. Her lawyer wanted to argue that Evan's financial instability made him an unfit custodial parent. "I'm working on it," Evan said, exhaustion making him blunt. "I'll have everything sorted before the hearing." "How?" Jennifer demanded. "Evan, I know you're trying. I know you love her. But love doesn't pay for her medication. Love doesn't keep a roof over her head. David and I can provide for her, really provide for her. Not just scraping by, but giving her opportunities. Dance classes, music lessons, college savings. I said I'm working on it. Evan's grip on the phone tightened. I'll have a stable situation within the month. Better than stable. Trust me. I want to trust you, Jennifer said, and she sounded genuinely sad. But you've been saying that for a year. At some point, I have to put Sarah first. She's always first for me. Evan's voice cracked. Everything I do is for her. Then prove it, Jennifer sighed. The hearing is in 6 weeks. If things haven't changed by then, Evan, I'm sorry, but I can't keep waiting for you to get your life together. The line went dead. Evan sat in the dark, the contract pages rustling in his trembling hands. 6 weeks. He had 6 weeks to prove he could provide for his daughter, or he'd lose her to a man who could give her everything Evan couldn't. He thought about Vivian Cross sitting in her glass tower, offering him a devil's bargain wrapped in cold efficiency. A year of pretending, a year of living a lie. But at the end of it, he'd have the means to keep Sarah, to give her the life Jennifer was threatening to provide. Was it really selling out if he was buying his daughter's future? Evan pulled out his phone and typed a message to the number Vivian had included in the contract. I'll be there at 9 a.m. tomorrow. We should discuss the finer details. The response came within seconds. I'll have my lawyer present. Come prepared to sign. No hesitation, no second thoughts. Just pure, efficient certainty. That was Vivian Cross, a woman who knew what she wanted and took it without flinching. Evan looked at the photo of Sarah he'd propped on his nightstand. Her smile seemed to glow in the dim light, full of trust that her daddy would make things right. He'd failed at his marriage, he'd failed at his career. But he wouldn't fail at being her father, even if it meant marrying a woman who would never love him, even if it meant pretending to be someone he wasn't, even if it meant sacrificing his own chance at happiness for hers. I'm sorry, he whispered to the photo, though he wasn't sure if he was apologizing for what he was about to do or for all the times he'd failed before. I'm going to fix this. I promise. The contract sat before him like a map to a foreign country. Tomorrow, he'd sign it. Tomorrow, he'd step into Vivian Cross's world. Tomorrow, everything would change. For tonight, he was still just Evan Cole, broke, desperate, and out of options. Tomorrow, he'd be someone else. Tomorrow, he'd become the husband of the most powerful woman in the city, and he had no idea if that would save him or destroy him. The morning arrived too quickly. Evan woke at 5 a.m., the contract still spread across his bed where he'd fallen asleep reading and rereading every clause. Sarah was already up, her small form silhouetted against the window as she watched the sunrise paint the city in shades of gold and pink. Couldn't sleep? Evan asked softly. Sarah turned, and in the early light she looked older than 8, wise beyond her years in the way children who've lived through hardship always do. I heard you on the phone last night, with Mom. Evan's chest tightened. Princess, you don't need to worry about that. Are we going to have to move again? Her voice was so small, so resigned to disappointment. Evan crossed to her and lifted her onto his lap, wrapping his arms around her. No, baby, we're not going to move again. In fact, he hesitated, then decided she deserved something close to the truth. I got a new opportunity at work. A big opportunity. It's going to change things for us. Good changes? Very good changes, Evan promised. We're going to be okay, Sarah. Better than okay. She leaned against his chest, trusting him completely. That trust was the heaviest thing he carried, heavier than the debt, heavier than the fear. It was the weight of being someone's entire world. At 8 a.m., Evan dropped Sarah at Mrs. Patterson's apartment with instructions to take her to school. He'd showered, shaved, put on his best suit, still shabby by executive standards, but it was all he had. The contract was tucked in his briefcase, every page read until the words blurred together. The bus ride to Cross Industries felt eternal. Evan watched the city transform around him as they moved from his neighborhood to downtown, graffiti giving way to glass towers, broken streets to polished marble. 2 different worlds, and he was about to leap from one to the other. At 8:55 a.m., he stepped off the elevator into Vivian's suite. Jessica looked up from her desk, her expression professionally neutral, but with a hint of curiosity. She knew. Maybe not the details, but she knew something significant was happening. "Mr. Cole, Ms. Cross is waiting. Her lawyer, Mr. Harrison, is also present." Evan knocked, entered. Vivian sat behind her desk as before, but now an older man in an expensive suit occupied one of the visitor chairs. He stood when Evan entered, extending a hand. "Thomas Harrison. I represent Ms. Cross. I understand you'll need representation as well. Ms. Cross has arranged for Michael Brennan from Hartley and Associates to review the contract from your perspective. He's waiting in the conference room next door. I suggest we take an hour for you to review the terms with him before we proceed." It was surreal, this level of efficiency, of resources deployed without hesitation. In Evan's world, lawyers were existential threats who sent letters demanding money he didn't have. In Vivian's world, they were tools to be utilized, problems to be solved with a phone call and a retainer. "Thank you," Evan managed. Michael Brennan turned out to be a sharp-eyed man in his 50s who spent 90 minutes dissecting every clause of the contract with Evan. His conclusion was delivered with professional detachment. "It's ironclad but fair. She's offering more than market value for what she's asking. The trust for your daughter is protected with triple redundancy. Even if Ms. Cross's company collapsed tomorrow, that money is untouchable. The post-divorce settlement is equally secure. From a legal standpoint, Mr. Cole, this is an extraordinarily generous offer. The question isn't whether the contract protects you. It does. The question is whether you can live with the arrangement it describes." That was the question, wasn't it? Could he live with it? At 10:30 a.m., Evan sat across from Vivian with both lawyers present. The papers were laid out in neat rows. Thomas Harrison explained the signing order, the witnesses required, the filing procedures. His voice droned on with legal precision while Evan's mind screamed 1,000 variations of "What are you doing?" "Mr. Cole?" Vivian's voice cut through his spiral. "Do you have any final questions before we proceed?" Evan looked at her, really looked at her. In the harsh light of morning, she seemed more human somehow. Tired, maybe, though she hid it well. A slight tension around her eyes. Fingers that gripped her pen too tightly. She was nervous. Not much, but enough to be visible if you knew how to look for cracks in perfect facades. "Why are you really doing this?" Evan asked quietly. "The truth. Not the official reason about your father's will. Why does maintaining control of Cross Industries matter so much that you'd marry a stranger?" Something flickered across Vivian's face. Surprise, maybe, that he'd asked. She glanced at the lawyers. "Gentlemen, give us a moment." Thomas looked like he wanted to argue, but Vivian's expression brooked no disagreement. Both men filed out, closing the door behind them with a soft click. Vivian stood, moving to the window. This seemed to be her habit when conversations turned difficult, putting glass between herself and whoever demanded something real. "My father built this company from nothing," she said finally. 40 years of his life poured into every decision, every risk. He was brilliant, also cruel, controlling, and impossible to please. When I was growing up, I thought if I could just be perfect enough, smart enough, strategic enough, ruthless enough, he'd finally see me as more than a disappointment for not being born male. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Instead, he left the company to me with strings attached. Prove you can commit to something, Vivian. Prove you're not too cold to build something lasting. Prove you're not broken. Evan heard the pain beneath the words, carefully controlled but still present. That's not proof of anything except his own prejudice. Perhaps, Vivian agreed. But Marcus is everything my father valued in a successor. Charming, conventional, willing to make comfortable choices. If I lose control, Marcus will dismantle everything that makes Cross Industries innovative. He'll chase short-term profits, gut the research divisions, turn us into just another faceless corporation. Hundreds of people will lose their jobs. Projects that could change entire industries will die. She turned to face him. So yes, I'll marry a stranger if that's what it takes. I'll do whatever is necessary to protect what my father built. Not for his sake, but because it deserves better than Marcus's mediocrity. It was the most human thing Evan had heard her say. Behind the Ice Queen exterior was someone fighting to prove her worth against impossible standards, protecting something she loved even if it cost her dignity. Okay, Evan said. Let's do this. They signed in silence, witnessed by lawyers who would file the papers that afternoon. With each signature, Evan felt his old life falling away. By the time the final document was notarized, he was no longer just Evan Cole, single father and struggling accountant. He was Vivian Cross's husband, and nothing would ever be the same. The penthouse occupied the entire 52nd floor of the Millennium Tower, a monument to wealth that made Evan's stomach turn as the private elevator climbed higher than he'd ever lived. Sarah pressed her face against the glass wall, watching the city shrink beneath them, her small backpack clutched in both hands. She hadn't said much since he'd explained they were moving, not angry, just quiet in that way that told him she was processing something too big for 8-year-old words. It's temporary, Evan had told her that morning while packing their few belongings. Ms. Cross needs help with a special project at work, and part of the arrangement includes housing. We'll have our own space. You'll have your own room. Not quite a lie. Not quite the truth. Sarah had nodded, asked if she could bring her stuffed elephant, and started folding her clothes with careful precision. She was so used to upheaval that this was just another change in a life defined by instability. The elevator chimed. The doors opened directly into the penthouse. No hallway, no neighbors, just immediate entry into a space that belonged in architecture magazines. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around 3 sides, offering views that stretched to the horizon. The interior was all clean lines and expensive minimalism. White marble floors, black leather furniture, abstract art that probably cost more than Evan's entire childhood home. Wow, Sarah breathed. Vivian emerged from what Evan assumed was the kitchen, looking different than she did at the office. She'd traded her severe suit for dark slacks and a cream cashmere sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders instead of pulled back. She looked younger like this, almost approachable. You're here. Vivian's gaze moved from Evan to Sarah, her expression carefully neutral. This is your daughter. Sarah, Evan said, placing a hand on his daughter's shoulder. Sarah, this is Ms. Cross. We're going to be staying here for a while. Sarah stepped forward, extending her hand with surprising formality. Thank you for letting us stay in your home, Ms. Cross. Something flickered in Vivian's eyes. Surprise, maybe, at the child's composure. She shook Sarah's hand with equal seriousness. You're welcome. I hope you'll be comfortable. Would you like to see your room? Vivian led them down a hallway, her heels clicking against marble. She stopped at a door and pushed it open, revealing a bedroom that made Sarah gasp. It was easily 3 times the size of their entire previous apartment, with its own bathroom, a bay window with a reading nook, and furniture that looked straight out of a catalog. The walls were painted a soft lavender, Sarah's favorite color, though Evan hadn't mentioned that. Either lucky guess or frighteningly thorough research. I wasn't sure what an 8-year-old would like, Vivian said, her tone still neutral, but watching Sarah's reaction carefully. If you'd prefer different colors or furniture, we can change it. It's perfect, Sarah whispered, setting down her backpack and moving to the window like she was afraid touching anything might make it disappear. I can see everything from here. Your room is next door, so Vivian told Evan, gesturing to an adjacent door. Connected bathroom between the 2 rooms, which you can lock from your side. The rest of the penthouse is shared space, though I'm rarely home before 8 p.m. on weekdays. Evan's room was equally impressive. King-sized bed, walk-in closet, bathroom with both a shower and a soaking tub that could fit 3 people. Everything was in shades of gray and navy, masculine and expensive. A far cry from the mattress on the floor he'd been sleeping on for the past year. There are some things we need to discuss, Vivian said once Sarah was occupied with exploring her new space. She led Evan to the kitchen, which was all stainless steel and granite, probably equipped for a professional chef, though Evan suspected it rarely got used. About how this arrangement will work practically. Evan leaned against the counter, exhaustion suddenly hitting him. It had been 3 days since he'd signed the contract. 3 days of whirlwind preparation, moving what little they owned, coordinating with Sarah's school for the address change, navigating Jennifer's suspicious questions about his sudden improvement in circumstances. I told my ex-wife I got a promotion, Evan said. She didn't believe it at first. I had to show her the new employment contract. Smart, Vivian said, pulling out her phone and typing something. I've arranged for your salary increase to be backdated and processed as a legitimate promotion. The narrative is that you impressed me with your audit work, and I moved you to a special projects position reporting directly to me. It's close enough to the truth to be believable. And when people ask why I'm living here, we're dating, Vivian said matter-of-factly. It moved quickly, rushed perhaps, but not unheard of. We'll announce the engagement in 2 weeks, marry within the month. The speed will raise eyebrows, but people expect me to be unconventional. It fits the narrative. Evan's head spun. 2 weeks. You want to announce we're engaged in 2 weeks. I want to have the wedding done within contract timelines, Vivian corrected. Everything must be finalized before my birthday. That gives us limited time to establish a believable relationship history. Starting tomorrow, we'll need to be seen together. Lunches, dinners, public enough to be noticed, but not so obvious it seems staged. I have Sarah, Evan protested. I can't just... I've arranged for a nanny, Vivian interrupted. Margaret Torres. She came highly recommended, has excellent references, and is available to start immediately. She'll handle after-school care on days when you have obligations with me. Evan's jaw tightened. I don't need a nanny. I take care of my daughter. And you still will, Vivian said, her tone sharpening. But this arrangement requires flexibility from both of us, unless you'd prefer to bring Sarah to business dinners and charity galas. She was right, and Evan hated that she was right. This was the deal. This was what he'd signed up for. Still, it rankled. This casual reorganization of his life, the way Vivian solved problems by throwing money and resources at them without asking what he might actually need or want. Fine, he said. But I meet this Margaret person before she spends any time with Sarah. And Sarah gets veto power. If she's not comfortable, we find someone else. Something that might have been respect crossed Vivian's face. Agreed. She'll be here tomorrow at 9 a.m. She pulled out a small box from a kitchen drawer and slid it across the counter. You'll need this. Evan opened it. Inside was a ring, elegant, expensive, a band of platinum with subtle detailing. Not flashy, but clearly worth more than any piece of jewelry he'd ever touched. It should fit, Vivian said. I estimated based on your hand size. There's a matching engagement ring for me that we'll present at the announcement. Evan slipped the ring on. Perfect fit, of course. Vivian Cross didn't do anything halfway. The metal felt foreign against his skin, a constant reminder of the bargain he'd made. One more thing, Vivian said, pulling out her phone again. We need to discuss the rules for cohabitation. She swiped through what appeared to be a document and handed him the phone. Evan scanned the list, his jaw dropping with each item. You made a list? I find clarity prevents misunderstandings, Vivian said. Review it and let me know if anything seems unreasonable. Evan read through the points, his disbelief growing. Shared spaces to be kept clean. Noise levels after 10 p.m. Guest policies. Schedule coordination for bathroom use. It read less like a marriage agreement and more like roommate rules for college freshmen. This is insane, he said finally. You do realize that, right? We're supposed to be married. Married people don't have guest policies and bathroom schedules. Married people who actually know each other don't, Vivian corrected. We're strangers living in close quarters. Without boundaries, this arrangement will become intolerable for both of us. Evan set down the phone, rubbing his temples. What happened to you that made you think this is how relationships work? Vivian's expression went cold. I don't recall opening that topic for discussion, Mr. Cole. It's Evan, he said. If we're going to do this, live together, pretend to be in love, convince the world we're married, you need to at least use my first name. Fine, Evan. She said it like she was testing the word. And you can continue calling me Ms. Cross in public, Vivian in private, once we've announced the engagement. That's another thing, Evan said, his frustration building. How exactly are we supposed to convince anyone we're in love when you talk to me like I'm an employee you're barely tolerating? I talk to everyone like that, Vivian said. It's never been a problem before. That's because everyone else doesn't have to pretend to want to marry you. The words came out harsher than Evan intended. Vivian's face went completely blank, all expression wiped away, leaving only that perfect mask she wore in the boardroom. When she spoke, her voice was ice. Perhaps we should establish another boundary. When we're not actively performing for an audience, we maintain professional distance. You live your life, I live mine. We coordinate when necessary and otherwise stay out of each other's way. That should minimize opportunities for friction. She walked past him toward her own bedroom, her posture rigid. Evan wanted to call her back, to apologize for the low blow, but what was the point? She was right. They were strangers bound by a contract, not a relationship. Expecting anything more was foolish. That night, Evan lay in the absurdly comfortable bed in his new room, staring at the ceiling and wondering what he'd gotten himself into. Through the walls, he could hear the faint sounds of Sarah settling into her own space, drawers opening and closing as she unpacked her few belongings, the creak of bed springs as she tested the mattress. She'd been quiet at dinner, picking at the Thai food Vivian had ordered. Apparently cooking wasn't something that happened in this kitchen. His phone buzzed. A text from Jennifer. "The address you gave the school is the Millennium Tower. Are you seriously living there?" "What's going on, Evan?" Evan typed and deleted 3 responses before settling on. "I told you. New position at work. It comes with housing benefits. Sarah is fine. Better than fine. I want to see her. This weekend." "Of course." "Saturday afternoon? I can bring her to you." "No, I want to see where she's living." "I'll come to you. 2 p.m. Evan closed his eyes. Jennifer would take one look at this place and immediately know something was wrong. She'd always been able to read him, even during the worst parts of their marriage. She'd see through whatever story he tried to sell. Another buzz, this time from Vivian. "We need to synchronize our story before any visitors arrive. Tomorrow morning, breakfast at 7. Come prepared to discuss relationship history details." Evan almost laughed. Relationship history details, like they were preparing for a deposition rather than trying to convince people they'd fallen in love. But that was the arrangement, wasn't it? Nothing real, everything calculated, emotions checked at the door. He thought about the ring on his finger, already leaving a pale band where it pressed against his skin. 24 hours in, and he already felt like he was playing a role in someone else's life. Morning came with winter sun streaming through windows that faced east. Evan woke before his alarm, disoriented by the unfamiliar room, the expensive sheets, the silence that came with being 52 floors above street noise. He checked on Sarah, still sleeping, her stuffed elephant clutched to her chest, then headed to the kitchen where Vivian was already seated at the dining table with her laptop and a cup of black coffee. She looked up when he entered, her expression unreadable. "Coffee's ready. Help yourself." The coffee was dark and rich, the kind you got at expensive cafes, not the instant stuff Evan had been making do with. He poured a cup and sat across from Vivian, the table large enough that they could have fit 6 more people comfortably. "We need a story," Vivian said without preamble. "How we met, when we started seeing each other, why we're moving so quickly. It needs to be consistent, believable, and simple enough that we won't contradict each other under casual questioning." Evan sipped his coffee. "You've thought about this." "I've thought about everything," Vivian said. "The narrative I'm proposing is this. We've been working together for 8 months since you joined the company. We maintained a professional relationship until about 6 weeks ago, when I asked you to stay late to help with a special project. Working closely revealed compatibility neither of us expected. We began dating discreetly. I value privacy. You were concerned about workplace perception. 3 weeks ago, I met Sarah. Last week, I proposed." "You proposed?" Evan raised an eyebrow. "That's not exactly traditional." "I'm not exactly traditional," Vivian said. "It fits my character. People expect me to approach relationships the way I approach business, directly and without excessive sentiment. You said yes because despite the unconventional nature, you recognize something genuine." She paused. "The key details are the timeline. 6 weeks of dating, discreet enough that most coworkers weren't aware. That explains why there's no social media history, no witnesses to our supposed romance." "What about the promotion? People will say you're showing favoritism." "Let them," Vivian said. "The promotion is legitimate. Your audit work was exemplary, and I need someone I trust for special projects. If people want to gossip about whether our personal relationship influenced professional decisions, that's background noise. What matters is that the core story is consistent." Evan set down his cup. "You're good at this. The lying." "I prefer to think of it as strategic narrative construction," Vivian said coolly. "And yes, I'm very good at it. I've spent my entire life managing perceptions and controlling information flow. This is no different." "It's completely different," Evan said. We're talking about faking emotions, not managing quarterly earnings reports. Are we? Vivian's gaze was steady. Because from where I sit, both require the same skills: understanding your audience, delivering consistent messages, maintaining credibility under scrutiny. The only difference is subject matter. Evan wanted to argue, but what was the point? She wasn't wrong, technically. He just hated how cold it all was, how calculated. This was his life she was strategizing about, his daughter's future built on a foundation of carefully constructed lies. Fine, he said. We have our story. What else? Physical comfort, Vivian said, and Evan nearly choked on his coffee. She continued without reaction. For the relationship to appear genuine, we need to be comfortable with casual physical contact, holding hands, my hand on your arm, brief touches that indicate familiarity. In public, especially at events where we'll be photographed, we may need to appear more affectionate. Define more affectionate. Arm around your waist, your arm around my shoulders, standing close. Perhaps, she hesitated, the first break in her perfect composure, occasional kissing. Nothing inappropriate. Brief and infrequent, but enough to sell the illusion. Evan's throat went dry. You want to practice kissing? I want to establish comfort with the concept, Vivian corrected. So when it becomes necessary, neither of us reacts awkwardly. We're supposed to be in love. People in love touch each other without thinking about it. This is insane, Evan muttered. This is the arrangement, Vivian said. If you're not comfortable with it, now would be the time to say so. Evan thought about Sarah, probably waking up in her lavender bedroom with its bay window and reading Nook. Thought about the trust fund that would pay for college, the health care that would cover every treatment she might ever need. Thought about Jennifer's custody motion and the hearing in 5 weeks. I'm comfortable with it, he lied. Vivian nodded as if checking an item off an invisible list. Good. We'll start with hand-holding at the office. Tomorrow we have lunch at Maria. It's public enough to be noticed, but not so obvious that we're staging. Friday evening, there's a gallery opening that several board members will attend. That will be our first major public appearance as a couple. That's in 3 days, Evan said. You don't think that's rushing it? We're announcing the engagement in 2 weeks, Vivian reminded him. A few public sightings before then makes the timeline more believable. People need to see us together enough to think they missed something obvious. A door opened down the hall. Sarah emerged, rubbing her eyes, wearing the oversized t-shirt she slept in. She froze when she saw Vivian at the table, suddenly shy. Good morning, Vivian said, her tone softening slightly. I hope you slept well. Sarah nodded, moving to Evan's side. He pulled her close, dropping a kiss on top of her head. Morning, princess. What do you want for breakfast? I don't know what there is, Sarah said quietly. Vivian stood, moving to the kitchen. I have a confession. I don't actually cook, but I had my assistant stock the refrigerator and pantry yesterday with things she thought a child might enjoy. Shall we investigate? She opened the massive refrigerator, revealing shelves packed with fresh fruit, yogurt, juice boxes, sandwich materials, more food than Evan usually bought in a month. The pantry was equally stocked with cereal, bread, pasta, snacks. Sarah's eyes went wide. You can have whatever you'd like, Vivian said. Though if you want something hot, your father will have to prepare it. My cooking skills are limited to ordering takeout. The admission surprised Evan. It was self-deprecating, almost human. Sarah giggled, the sound breaking some of the morning's tension. Daddy makes really good pancakes, she said. Then pancakes it is, Evan said, grateful for something normal to do. He rummaged through the unfamiliar kitchen, finding a pan, a mixing bowl, ingredients. Vivian returned to her laptop while Sarah sat at the counter, swinging her legs and talking about what she wanted to do with her new room. The scene was bizarrely domestic, like playing house, except the house cost several $1,000,000, and the marriage was a business transaction. By the time Margaret Torres arrived at 9 a.m., Evan had almost convinced himself this could work. Margaret was in her 50s, warm and competent, with decades of childcare experience and references that could probably get her security clearance at the Pentagon. She spent an hour talking with Evan and Sarah, asking questions about routines and preferences, never once making Sarah feel like she was being interviewed. What do you think? Evan asked Sarah after Margaret had left. Sarah considered carefully. I like her. She's nice, and she said she likes to bake cookies. Cookies are important, Evan agreed, relieved. One less thing to worry about. The week blurred into a crash course in being Vivian Cross's boyfriend. Lunch on Tuesday at the restaurant where Vivian casually mentioned she was seeing someone, letting the information ripple through their waiter to the rest of the staff, who would spread it to the social circles that overlapped with business circles. Dinner on Wednesday at a steakhouse where they ran into one of Vivian's board members, forcing Evan to play the role of smitten new boyfriend under direct scrutiny. "You're doing well," Vivian said in the car ride home that night. Gerald was impressed. "He said you seemed genuine." "Maybe because some of it is genuine," Evan said before he could stop himself. Vivian turned to look at him, her expression unreadable in the dim light. "What do you mean?" Evan shrugged, uncomfortable. "I don't know. You're not what I expected. When we're not actively arguing about bathroom schedules, you're almost pleasant to be around." "Almost pleasant," Vivian repeated, and he could swear there was amusement in her voice. "High praise indeed." "I'm serious. You're funny sometimes," in a dry, sarcastic way. "And you were good with Sarah this morning when she spilled juice all over the counter. I thought you'd be angry, but you just helped her clean it up." "I'm not a monster," Vivian said quietly, despite what my reputation might suggest. "I'm starting to realize that," Evan said. They rode the rest of the way in silence, but it felt different somehow, less hostile, more like two people who were slowly figuring out how to exist in the same space. Friday evening brought the gallery opening and Evan's first real test. Vivian had sent a stylist to the penthouse that afternoon. Apparently his suits weren't suitable for the circles they'd be moving in. The stylist, a sharp-eyed woman named Claudia, had measured and fitted him with brutal efficiency, leaving behind 3 new suits, dress shirts, ties, and shoes that cost more than his previous monthly rent. "You look handsome," Sarah said when Evan emerged from his room in the charcoal suit Claudia had declared most appropriate for the evening. "I look like I'm playing dress-up," Evan muttered, tugging at the collar. "You look distinguished," Vivian said, appearing from her own room in a black dress that was somehow both elegant and devastating. Her hair was up, diamonds at her throat and ears. Real ones, Evan assumed, given everything else. She looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine spread, untouchable and perfect. "Ready?" she asked. "As I'll ever be," Evan said. The gallery was in Chelsea, a converted warehouse now housing contemporary art that Evan didn't understand, but Vivian navigated like a native speaker. She moved through the space with practiced ease, her hand resting lightly on Evan's arm, introducing him to people whose names he immediately forgot. He smiled, made appropriate comments, and tried not to feel like an imposter in borrowed clothes. "Vivian!" A woman approached, tall and elegant with silver hair. "Darling, it's been too long." "Catherine," Vivian said, and Evan caught the slight tension in her posture. "I didn't know you'd be here." "I wouldn't miss Robert's showing." Catherine's gaze slid to Evan with predatory interest. "And who is this? You never bring dates to these things." "This is Evan Cole," Vivian said, her hand tightening fractionally on his arm. "Evan, this is Catherine Merrick, one of our board members." "Ah," Catherine's smile sharpened. "The mysterious new Special Projects Director. I've heard interesting things about you, Mr. Cole." "All good, I hope," Evan said, channeling every ounce of confidence he didn't feel. "That remains to be seen," Catherine said. "How long have you and Vivian been involved?" "Not long enough," Evan said, deciding to lean into it. "Though I'm trying to convince her to make it permanent." Catherine's eyebrows rose. Vivian went very still beside him. He'd gone off script. They hadn't discussed proposals or permanence, but something about Catherine's condescending tone had sparked his temper. "Bold," Catherine said. "Vivian doesn't typically do permanent." "Maybe she was waiting for the right person," Evan said, pulling Vivian closer. She fit against his side naturally, and when she looked up at him, her expression was grateful, or maybe surprised, possibly both. "We'll see," Catherine said, her tone skeptical. "Enjoy the exhibit." She drifted away, leaving Vivian and Evan standing close together in the middle of the crowded gallery. "That was risky," Vivian said quietly. "She was being condescending," Evan said, "and she clearly doesn't believe we're real. Figured I'd give her something to chew on. By announcing your intention to propose before we've even officially announced we're dating? Is it really announcing if we both know it's already happening? Evan countered. Vivian's lips curved into something that was almost a genuine smile. Fair point. Though next time warn me before you improvise. Where's the fun in that? They moved through the rest of the evening as a team, Evan slowly relaxing into the role. Vivian was good at this, the social chess, reading people, knowing exactly what to say. But occasionally, when she thought no one was watching, her mask would slip. Evan caught glimpses of exhaustion, of someone playing a part because it was expected, not because she enjoyed it. During a quiet moment when they were pretending to examine a particularly abstract piece, Evan was pretty sure it was just splatters of paint. But what did he know? Vivian leaned close. Thank you, she said softly. For earlier, with Catherine, you didn't have to defend me. Actually, I did, Evan said. That's the deal, right? We're a team now, at least in public. Right, Vivian said, something complex moving across her face. In public. The ride home was quiet. Sarah was already asleep when they got back, Margaret dozing on the couch with a book in her lap. She left after giving them a brief update on the evening, and suddenly Evan and Vivian were alone in the too large living room, the city lights stretching out beyond the windows. That went well, Vivian said, slipping off her heels with visible relief. Better than I expected, actually. You're a natural at this. At lying, Evan said, loosening his tie. At understanding what people need to see, Vivian corrected. She moved to the bar, pouring herself 2 fingers of scotch. Want one? Sure. She poured a second glass and handed it to him. They stood at the window, looking out at the city that sparkled like scattered diamonds. Do you ever wonder what it would be like? Evan asked. If this was real? Vivian took a long sip of her drink. No, she said finally. Real relationships require things I don't have. Vulnerability, trust, the ability to put someone else's needs before the company's bottom line. I'm not built for that. I don't believe that, Evan said. I've seen you with Sarah. You're gentle with her, patient. Those aren't qualities you fake. Children are different, Vivian said. They don't want anything from you except attention and kindness. Adults always want something more. And what do I want from you? Evan challenged. Security for your daughter, financial stability, a solution to your custody problem. She said it matter-of-factly, without judgment. All perfectly reasonable things. I'm providing them. In exchange, you're providing me with the appearance of stability that satisfies my father's archaic requirements. It's honest, in its way. We both know exactly what we're getting. Evan wanted to argue, but she wasn't wrong. That was the arrangement. That was the deal. Expecting more, wanting more, was foolish. Still, as he headed to bed that night, he couldn't shake the feeling that the lines were already blurring. That somewhere between the contract signing and tonight's performance, something had shifted. They were still strangers, technically, still bound by rules and boundaries and careful distance. But they were strangers who were learning each other's rhythms, who could read each other's signals in a crowded room, who fit together naturally when circumstances demanded it. And that, Evan realized as he lay in the dark, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the penthouse settling, was more dangerous than any clause in their contract. 2 weeks became 3. And the boundaries Vivian had so carefully constructed began to crack in ways neither of them acknowledged out loud. It started small, Vivian working from the dining table instead of isolating in her office, asking Evan's opinion on presentations she was preparing. Evan making enough coffee for 2 every morning, learning how she took it without asking. Sarah drawing pictures that somehow always included 3 people now, stick figures holding hands in front of a tall building. The engagement announcement went live on a Thursday morning, carefully orchestrated through a press release and simultaneous social media posts. Evan's phone exploded with messages from people he hadn't spoken to in years, all of them shocked that quiet, struggling Evan Cole was marrying Vivian Cross. Jennifer called 6 times before he finally answered. You're engaged? Her voice was sharp with disbelief. Evan, you've known her for what, 2 months? 6 weeks of actually dating, Evan said, sticking to the script. I know it's fast, but when you know, you know. That's a greeting card answer, Jennifer snapped. This isn't you. You don't do impulsive. You don't date CEOs. What's really going on? I'm happy, Evan said, and was surprised to find that parts of it felt true. Sarah's happy. We're stable. Isn't that what you wanted? The silence on the other end stretched long enough that Evan thought she'd hung up. Then, I'm still coming Saturday. I need to see this for myself. Saturday arrived with the weight of judgment hanging over it. Evan cleaned the already spotless penthouse, rearranged furniture that didn't need rearranging, changed his shirt 3 times. Vivian watched his nervous energy with something that might have been amusement. It's your ex-wife, not a visiting dignitary, Vivian said, sitting on the couch with her laptop. She'd insisted on being present for Jennifer's visit. It would look strange if I wasn't, she'd argued, and had dressed down in jeans and a simple sweater that somehow made her look more intimidating than her business suits. She knows me too well, Evan said. She'll see right through this. Then don't let her, Vivian said simply. We've been doing this for 3 weeks. We know how to sell it. The doorbell rang at exactly 2 p.m. Jennifer was punctual, always had been. Evan opened the door to find her standing with her new husband, David, both of them dressed like they were attending a business meeting rather than visiting their daughter. Jennifer, David, Evan stepped aside. Come in. Jennifer's eyes went wide as she took in the penthouse, the view, the sheer scale of wealth on display. David whistled low under his breath. Sarah came running from her room, launching herself at Jennifer with the enthusiasm of a child who'd missed her mother. Mom, look at my room. It has a window seat and everything. I can't wait to see it, baby, Jennifer said. But her eyes were on Vivian, who had stood and was moving toward them with practiced grace. You must be Jennifer, Vivian said, extending her hand. I've heard wonderful things. I'm Vivian. Yes, I know who you are, Jennifer said, shaking Vivian's hand with visible reluctance. Everyone knows who you are. The tension was immediate and thick. David cleared his throat awkwardly, trying to ease it. This is quite a place, he said. Must be something, living this high up. The view is remarkable, Vivian agreed, though I confess I'm rarely here long enough to enjoy it. Can I offer you coffee? Wine? Coffee's fine, Jennifer said, her gaze moving between Vivian and Evan like she was trying to solve an equation that didn't add up. They settled in the living room, Sarah excitedly telling Jennifer about her new school friends, her room, the building's amenities. There was a pool, a gym, a library. Jennifer listened with growing discomfort, occasionally glancing at Evan like she couldn't reconcile this reality with the man she'd divorced. Sarah, honey, why don't you show me your room? Jennifer finally said, standing. I want to see everything. It was a transparent excuse to talk to Evan privately. He followed them down the hall, feeling David and Vivian's eyes on his back. Sarah's room was exactly as she'd left it that morning. Organized chaos, drawings scattered across her desk, books stacked on the window seat. This is beautiful, baby, Jennifer said, but her attention was on Evan. Can you give us a minute, Sarah? I need to talk to Daddy. Sarah nodded and skipped back toward the living room. Jennifer closed the door the moment she was gone. What the hell is going on? She demanded, her voice low and furious. 6 weeks ago, you were about to be evicted. Now you're living in a penthouse and engaged to a billionaire? This doesn't happen, Evan. People don't go from broke to this overnight. I got a promotion, Evan said. I told you. A promotion doesn't explain this. Jennifer cut him off, gesturing at the expensive surroundings. A promotion doesn't explain why Vivian Cross, a woman known for being married to her work, suddenly decides to marry someone she barely knows. What did you do? What kind of deal did you make? Evan's jaw tightened. I fell in love. Is that so impossible to believe? With her? Yes, actually. Jennifer crossed her arms. She's not your type. She's cold, calculating, all business. You like warmth. You like people who laugh easily and don't take themselves too seriously. She's nothing like what you wanted. Maybe what I wanted changed, Evan said, feeling defensive and hating it. Maybe I grew up and realized that stability matters more than chemistry. You're lying to me, Jennifer said flatly. I know you, Evan. I know when you're hiding something. This whole thing feels wrong. Does it feel wrong that Sarah has her own room, that she's eating 3 meals a day, that I can afford her medication without choosing between that and rent? Evan's voice rose despite his efforts to control it. Does it feel wrong that for the first time in 3 years, I'm not drowning? Jennifer flinched. I know it's been hard. You don't know, Evan said. You remarried a guy with money. You got stability. You got security. Why is it so impossible to believe that I found the same thing? Because you're not in love with her, Jennifer said quietly. Whatever this is, arrangement, deal, transaction, it's not love. I can see it in the way you look at her. There's respect, maybe even affection, but not love. The accuracy of her observation felt like a knife between his ribs. Evan forced himself to meet her eyes. I care about her, he said, which was true in ways he hadn't expected. I care about Sarah. I care about building something stable. If that doesn't fit your definition of love, that's your problem, not mine. Jennifer studied him for a long moment, her expression softening slightly. I hope you know what you're doing, because when this falls apart, and it will fall apart, Evan, Sarah's the one who'll pay the price. She left the room, leaving Evan standing alone with his daughter's drawings on the walls and his ex-wife's words echoing in his head. When he returned to the living room, the conversation had clearly been equally tense. Vivian's posture was rigid, David looked uncomfortable, and Jennifer was gathering her purse. We should go, Jennifer said. Sarah, give me a hug, baby. Sarah hugged her mother tightly, then David. At the door, Jennifer paused and looked back at Vivian. Take care of them, she said, and it wasn't quite a request. Whatever else this is, they deserve that. I intend to, Vivian said, her voice steady. The door closed, and the silence that followed was deafening. Sarah had already disappeared back to her room, leaving Evan and Vivian alone. That went well, Evan said sarcastically, collapsing onto the couch. She doesn't believe us, Vivian said, still standing by the door. She's going to be a problem. She won't say anything, Evan said, not without proof. And she doesn't have proof. She has instincts, Vivian countered. And she's right. We're not in love. Anyone who knows you well enough would see it. Then what do we do? Evan asked, exhaustion making him blunt. Because in 3 weeks we're getting married, and I guarantee Jennifer won't be the only skeptic in the room. Vivian was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tapping against her thigh in a rare display of nerves. We need to be more convincing, more tactile. Public displays that read as genuine rather than performed. You mean kissing, Evan said. Among other things, Vivian agreed. We've been too careful, too controlled. Real couples are messier, more spontaneous. I don't know if you've noticed, but spontaneity isn't exactly your strong suit, Evan said. Something that might have been a smile crossed Vivian's face. Then perhaps you'll have to teach me. The wedding was scheduled for 3 weeks out at Vivian's family estate upstate, a sprawling property that had been in the Cross family for generations. Evan had seen photos, had nodded along as Vivian explained the logistics, but he hadn't actually thought about what it meant until they drove up the following weekend for what Vivian called preliminary preparations. The estate was overwhelming. A main house that could accurately be called a mansion, surrounded by gardens and outbuildings and enough land that you couldn't see the property lines. Vivian's mother, Eleanor Cross, waited on the front steps, a woman in her 70s who wore pearls and judgment with equal comfort. Vivian, Eleanor said, kissing her daughter's cheeks with the warmth of a business transaction. And this must be Evan. Mrs. Cross, Evan said, extending his hand, thank you for hosting the wedding. It's where all the Cross marriages have begun, Eleanor said, her tone suggesting this was obligation rather than joy. Though I must say the timeline is rather rushed. One wonders about the hurry. When you know, you don't see the point in waiting, Vivian said smoothly, taking Evan's hand. Her fingers were cold despite the warm afternoon. Besides, you always said I needed to settle down before 42. I'm simply being efficient. Eleanor's lips thinned. Efficiency isn't romance, darling. But then you've never been particularly romantic, have you? The barb landed. Evan could see it in the way Vivian's shoulders tensed. Without thinking, he pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. I think she's plenty romantic, he said. She just needed the right person to bring it out. Eleanor's eyebrows rose. Vivian looked up at him, surprise clear in her expression. The moment stretched, awkward and strange, until Eleanor cleared her throat. Well, let's discuss the arrangements, shall we? Marcus should be here shortly to join us. Marcus. Vivian had warned him about her half-brother, ambitious, manipulative, determined to take control of Cross Industries. Evan had imagined someone overtly villainous, but when Marcus arrived 20 minutes later, he was disappointingly normal. Handsome in a conventional way, well-dressed, charming as he introduced himself. "So you're the mysterious Evan," Marcus said, shaking his hand with a grip just slightly too firm. "Quite a coup, landing Vivian. Most men find her too intimidating." "Most men are intimidated by competent women," Evan said. "I find it attractive." Marcus's smile didn't reach his eyes. "How progressive." "Tell me, what is it you do? Vivian mentioned you work at Cross Industries." "Special projects," Evan said, using the vague title Vivian had given him. "I report directly to Vivian." "How convenient," Marcus said. "Working together and living together. You must spend every waking moment in each other's company." "Not quite," Vivian interjected. "Evan has a daughter who requires attention, and I have a company to run. We balance." "A daughter," Eleanor said, as if just remembering. "Yes, from your previous marriage. She'll be living with you?" "She already is," Evan said, feeling defensive. "Sarah's 8. She's wonderful." "I'm sure," Eleanor said, in a tone that suggested she wasn't sure at all. "It's quite modern, blending families so quickly. In my day, one waited." The conversation continued in this vein, polite on the surface, hostile underneath. Marcus asked questions designed to probe for weaknesses in their story. Eleanor made comments that questioned everything from their timeline to their compatibility. Through it all, Vivian remained perfectly controlled, her mask firmly in place. But Evan was watching for the cracks now, and he saw them. The way her jaw tightened when Marcus mentioned her management style, the barely perceptible flinch when Eleanor criticized the wedding date, the careful distance she maintained from both of them, as if proximity might burn. By the time they retreated to the guest house where they'd be staying, separate from the main house, which felt like a small mercy, Vivian looked exhausted in a way Evan had never seen. She kicked off her heels and collapsed onto the couch, closing her eyes. "Your family is intense," Evan said carefully. "My family is toxic," Vivian corrected without opening her eyes. "Marcus wants me to fail so he can take over. My mother wants me to fail because she never believed women should run companies, certainly not her difficult, cold daughter. And my father—" She stopped, opening her eyes to stare at the ceiling. "My father created this situation because even from the grave, he couldn't resist controlling me." Evan sat down beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. "For what it's worth, I think you're doing an incredible job. With the company, I mean. The audit reports show growth in every division. Employee satisfaction is up. You're nothing like Marcus painted you." "Marcus paints everyone as incompetent except himself," Vivian said. "It's his signature move. Undermine, destabilize, then position himself as the solution." She turned her head to look at Evan. "He's going to try to expose us. You realize that? He's probably already digging, looking for proof that this marriage is fake." "Then we make sure he doesn't find any," Evan said. "How? We barely touch. We maintain separate bedrooms, even in private. Anyone watching closely would see we're not—" She stopped herself. "Not what?" Evan asked quietly. "Not in love," Vivian finished. "Jennifer saw it immediately. Marcus will see it too. And once he has that leverage, he'll use it to destroy everything." Evan thought about Jennifer's words, about the way real couples were messy and spontaneous, about how their careful distance might be the very thing that gave them away. "So we change," he said. "We stop being so careful." "What do you mean?" "I mean we actually try," Evan said. "Not just the public performances, but the private moments. We learn to be comfortable with each other, to touch without thinking about it, to act like people who actually share a life instead of people following a script." Vivian sat up, studying him with those dark eyes that always seemed to see too much. "That's dangerous." "More dangerous than Marcus exposing us?" Evan challenged. "Different dangerous," Vivian said. "What you're suggesting, blurring the lines between performance and reality, that's how people get hurt." "We're adults," Evan said. "We both know what this is. We can handle being more convincing without losing sight of the arrangement." Vivian looked like she wanted to argue, but footsteps on the guest house porch interrupted. Marcus's voice called through the door. "Vivian, Mother wants to discuss the ceremony schedule. Vivian stood, smoothing her clothes, her mask sliding back into place. But before she opened the door, she looked back at Evan. Fine, she said quietly. We'll try it your way. But don't say I didn't warn you when the lines get too blurred to see clearly. She opened the door, and Marcus stood there with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. But instead of his usual calculation, Evan saw something else. Suspicion, sharp and focused. Marcus was watching them, looking for cracks, looking for proof. The realization hit Evan like cold water. Marcus wasn't waiting to investigate. He already was. The next morning, Evan woke to find the guest house empty. Vivian's bedroom door was open, her bed perfectly made, no sign she'd slept there at all. He found her in the estate's garden, sitting on a stone bench with a cup of coffee, staring at nothing. Couldn't sleep? He asked, sitting beside her. I don't sleep well here, Vivian said. Too many memories. None of them good. Evan waited, giving her space to continue if she wanted. After a long moment, she did. My father used to test me, she said quietly. Business scenarios, ethical dilemmas, leadership challenges. From the time I was 12 until I left for college, every dinner was an interrogation disguised as conversation. Marcus would give simple answers, whatever he thought Father wanted to hear. I'd try to give honest ones, and Father would tear them apart, show me all the ways I was wrong, not strategic enough, too emotional, too soft. She laughed bitterly. He was training me to take over the company, but what he was really doing was teaching me that vulnerability was weakness, that caring about people meant failure. That's not true, Evan said. Isn't it? Vivian looked at him. Every relationship I've had has ended because I couldn't give enough of myself. Every friendship faded because I put the company first. I'm 41 years old, and I'm marrying someone I barely know because it's the only way to save what my father built. He was right about me. I'm too cold for real connections. You're not cold, Evan said firmly. You're careful. There's a difference. You've been hurt, so you protect yourself. That's not weakness. That's survival. Vivian was quiet for a long moment. Then, so softly, he almost missed it. Why are you being kind to me? Because you deserve kindness, Evan said. And because... He stopped, surprised by what he was about to say. Because I don't think you're the person everyone thinks you are. I think you're someone who spent so long wearing armor that you've forgotten you don't have to wear it all the time. Vivian's eyes glistened, and for a moment Evan thought she might cry. But she blinked, and the moment passed, control reasserting itself. We should head back, she said, standing. Mother will wonder where we are. But as they walked back to the main house, Vivian's hand found his, her fingers threading through his like it was the most natural thing in the world. Neither of them commented on it. Neither of them let go. The week that followed was a masterclass in manufactured intimacy. They held hands constantly, even when no one was watching. Vivian started working from the dining table, asking Evan's opinion on decisions that had nothing to do with his actual role. They watched movies with Sarah curled between them, Vivian slowly learning to interact with a child who wasn't intimidated by her. Evan caught himself noticing things. How Vivian laughed at Sarah's jokes, genuine and unguarded. How she looked in the morning with her hair down and no makeup, softer somehow. How her hand felt in his, warm and certain. 3 days before the wedding, they attended the final venue walkthrough at the estate. Marcus was there, hovering like a vulture, his eyes tracking every interaction. Evan and Vivian moved through the space, discussing placement and timing, and Evan became increasingly aware of Marcus's scrutiny. The ceremony will be here, Vivian said, gesturing to the garden. Reception in the main house. About 200 guests. 200 people watching us lie, Evan muttered. 200 people watching us commit to a legal arrangement, Vivian corrected, but there was no bite to it. Try to look happy about it. I'll do my best, Evan said, pulling her close and pressing a kiss to her forehead. It was becoming habit now, these small touches. Easier every time. He heard a camera click. They both turned to find Marcus lowering his phone, that predatory smile on his face. Sorry, Marcus said, not sounding sorry at all. Couldn't resist. You two look so perfectly in love. There was something in his tone that made Evan's skin prickle. Vivian's hand tightened on his arm. Marcus, she said carefully, What are you doing? Just documenting the happy couple, Marcus said. Though I'm curious, when exactly did this grand romance begin? Because I've been reviewing some interesting security footage from the office, time-stamped, dated. And you know what's fascinating? Until about 6 weeks ago, you and Evan barely spoke. No shared lunches, no lingering in doorways, nothing. Then suddenly, he snapped his fingers. True love. People keep things private, Vivian said, her voice cold. Surely you understand discretion. I understand discretion, Marcus agreed. I also understand contract marriages. Tell me, how much is he costing you? What's the going rate for a husband these days? Evan's blood ran cold. Vivian's face went completely blank, that perfect mask slamming into place. But Evan could feel her pulse racing where their arms touched. You're suggesting I paid Evan to marry me? Vivian said, her tone dangerous. I'm suggesting that your sudden engagement to a junior employee with a documented financial crisis is convenient, Marcus said, especially given that Father's will requires you to be married by your birthday, which is, 3 weeks away? 2.5, Vivian said. And yes, the timing is convenient. It also happens to be genuine. Not that I expect you to believe in genuine emotion, Marcus. That would require you to feel something beyond ambition. Clever, Marcus said, but I've been doing research, talking to people. Your ex-wife, for instance, he looked at Evan. She's very concerned about this rushed arrangement, very concerned about what it means for her daughter. She's been quite forthcoming about your financial troubles, your desperation. It paints an interesting picture. Evan's jaw tightened. Leave Jennifer out of this. I'm just gathering facts, Marcus said innocently. And the facts suggest that you two barely know each other, that this marriage is suspiciously timed, and that there are significant financial incentives for both of you to lie. I wonder what the board will think when I present this information. You have no proof, Vivian said. Not yet, Marcus agreed. But I will. And when I do, you'll lose everything. The company, your reputation, your precious control. All because you thought you could outsmart Father's will with a fake marriage. He walked away, leaving them standing in the garden with the weight of exposure hanging over them. Vivian's hand was shaking where it gripped Evan's arm. He covered it with his own, steadying her. He's bluffing, Evan said, though he wasn't sure he believed it. He's not, Vivian said quietly. Marcus doesn't bluff. He's been waiting for this, watching, gathering evidence, and if Jennifer's been talking to him... Jennifer wouldn't, Evan started, then stopped. Would she? If she thought she was protecting Sarah, if she believed the marriage was harmful, would Jennifer give Marcus what he needed to destroy them? We need to be more convincing, Vivian said, her voice tight with stress. Not just convincing, perfect, unimpeachable. We need to make everyone, Marcus, the board, your ex-wife, believe this is real beyond any shadow of doubt. How? Evan asked. We can't manufacture history. We can't change the fact that we barely knew each other 6 weeks ago. Vivian turned to face him, her expression intense. Then we make the present so convincing that the past doesn't matter. We make people see what they want to see, a romance that moved quickly because it was undeniable. People believe in fairy tales, Evan. We give them one. That's not going to be enough for Marcus, Evan said. He's looking for cracks. He'll find them. Then we don't give him any, Vivian said. She was close now, close enough that Evan could see the gold flecks in her dark eyes, the slight tremor in her lips despite her controlled voice. We commit completely. No more separate bedrooms, no more careful distance. We live as if this marriage is real in every way that matters. Vivian, I know what I'm asking, she said. I know it's not what we agreed to, but Marcus is right about one thing. The timeline is suspicious. The only way to counter suspicion is with absolute conviction, with a relationship so obviously genuine that questioning it seems absurd. Evan thought about the contract, about the careful boundaries they'd established, about the danger of blurring lines too thoroughly. But he also thought about Sarah, about the future that would disappear if Marcus succeeded, about Vivian, standing in her family's garden looking more vulnerable than he'd ever seen her. Okay, he said. We do it your way. Complete commitment. No cracks. No cracks, Vivian repeated. She reached up, her hand trembling slightly as she touched his face. This has to look real, Evan. Not performed. Real. I know, Evan said. And then, because Marcus was probably still watching from somewhere, because the cameras were always watching, because they needed to start being convincing right now, or maybe because the line between performance and reality had already blurred more than either of them wanted to admit, Evan leaned down and kissed her. It was supposed to be for show. A performance. Proof for Marcus's cameras that they were genuinely in love. But the moment their lips met, something shifted. Vivian's sharp intake of breath, her hands clutching his shirt, the way she leaned into him like he was the only solid thing in a world that was crumbling. The kiss deepened, became real in a way neither of them had planned. When they finally pulled apart, Vivian was looking at him with something between shock and fear and something else he couldn't name. That was, she started. Convincing, Evan finished, his heart hammering. That was convincing. Right, Vivian said, but her voice was unsteady. Convincing. They stood there in the garden, the afternoon sun casting long shadows, both of them knowing that something had just changed, something neither of them had intended. The kiss was supposed to be fake, meant for Marcus's cameras and suspicious eyes, but it hadn't felt fake. And that, Evan realized with growing alarm, was the most dangerous thing of all. The ride back to the city was silent, the kind of silence that pressed against the car windows and made breathing feel deliberate. Sarah had fallen asleep in the back seat, her head pillowed on her backpack, blissfully unaware of the tension crackling between the two adults in front. Evan kept his eyes on the road, hyper-aware of Vivian in the passenger seat, of the way she'd barely looked at him since the kiss that wasn't supposed to mean anything, since the kiss that had meant everything. We should talk about what happened, Evan finally said as the city skyline came into view, all glass and steel catching the last rays of sunset. There's nothing to discuss, Vivian said, her tone professionally neutral. We established convincing physical chemistry for Marcus's benefit. Mission accomplished. That's what we're calling it. Evan's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Physical chemistry. What would you prefer to call it? Vivian's voice was sharp now, defensive. A moment of weakness? A mistake? Or perhaps we could be honest and admit we got caught up in the performance. Is that what you think happened? Evan asked, risking a glance at her. Vivian was staring straight ahead, her profile carved from marble. We got caught up? What else could it be? Vivian said, but there was a tremor beneath the words. We have an arrangement, Evan. A contract. Whatever just happened doesn't change that. Doesn't it? Evan challenged. Because from where I'm sitting, things changed the moment we signed those papers. Maybe even before that. And pretending otherwise is just another kind of lie. Vivian turned to look at him then, her expression unreadable in the dim light. What are you saying? I'm saying I don't know anymore, Evan admitted. I don't know where the performance ends and reality begins. I don't know if I'm pretending to care about you or if I actually do. And I think, he paused, the words dangerous. I think you don't know either. Vivian looked away, but not before Evan caught something vulnerable in her expression. It doesn't matter what I know or don't know. We have 2 days until the wedding, 2 days to be absolutely convincing, to make Marcus's suspicions seem like paranoid jealousy. What I feel or don't feel is irrelevant. It's not irrelevant to me, Evan said quietly. Then make it irrelevant, Vivian said, her voice cold now, that perfect control slamming back into place. Because the alternative is risking everything we've worked for, everything your daughter needs, everything I need. One moment of confusion doesn't erase the reality of our situation. She was right. Evan knew she was right, but knowing it didn't make the truth any easier to swallow. They drove the rest of the way in silence, Sarah waking only when they pulled into the building's underground garage. The elevator ride up felt eternal, the three of them standing in carefully maintained spaces, no one touching despite how natural it had become. That night, Evan lay in his bed staring at the ceiling, acutely aware that Vivian was doing the same one room over. The connecting bathroom door was closed, locked from both sides, as it always had been. Separate lives, the contract had said. Mutual respect for boundaries. Everything carefully delineated and controlled. Except nothing felt controlled anymore. His phone buzzed, a text from Vivian. I've been thinking about what you said. You're right, the lines have blurred. But we can't afford to act on that confusion. Too much is at stake. Evan stared at the message, then typed back, I know, but for the record, I don't think it's confusion. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, then what is it? Evan's fingers hovered over the keyboard. What was it? What did you call this thing that had grown between contract signatures and shared coffee mornings and his daughter's laughter filling spaces that had been silent for too long? What did you call caring about someone you'd agreed to pretend to love? I don't have a word for it yet, he finally wrote. But I know it's not fake. The dots appeared and stayed there for a long time. Then, good night, Evan. Not an answer, not an agreement, just retreat into the safety of distance and denial. Evan set down his phone and closed his eyes, knowing sleep wouldn't come easily. The next morning brought chaos. The wedding was tomorrow, and suddenly there were 1,000 last-minute details demanding attention. Florists confirming arrangements, caterers finalizing menus, Eleanor calling every hour with new concerns about the ceremony. Vivian handled it all with her usual efficiency, her mask firmly in place, no trace of the vulnerability Evan had glimpsed the day before. Daddy, is Ms. Vivian okay? Sarah asked over breakfast, watching Vivian pace the living room with her phone pressed to her ear, her free hand gesturing sharply as she dealt with some crisis Evan couldn't hear. She's just stressed about the wedding, Evan said, pouring Sarah more orange juice. It's a lot to organize. Are you stressed? Sarah asked, her brown eyes too perceptive for 8 years old. Evan considered lying, then decided against it. A little, yeah. Because you're marrying Ms. Vivian? Because marriage is a big step, Evan said carefully, even when you're sure about it. Sarah was quiet for a moment, pushing cereal around her bowl. Do you love her? The question hit harder than it should have. Evan opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. I care about her very much. That's not the same thing, Sarah said with the brutal honesty of children. In the movies, people always say I love you when they get married. You've never said that to her. Adults are more complicated than movies, Evan said, which was both true and a complete dodge. That's what grown-ups say when they don't want to answer, Sarah said, too smart for her own good. But she let it drop, returning to her cereal while Evan sat with the weight of her observation. Vivian ended her call and joined them at the table, rubbing her temples. The florist somehow ordered white roses instead of ivory. Eleanor is having a meltdown, as if anyone could tell the difference. Can they? Evan asked. In certain lighting, allegedly, Vivian said, though I suspect it's more about control than aesthetics. My mother excels at creating crises she can then solve, thereby proving her indispensability. Like mother, like daughter, Evan said without thinking. Vivian's gaze snapped to him, sharp and dangerous. Excuse me? I just meant, Evan backpedaled, aware of Sarah watching. You're both very good at managing details. That's not what you meant, Vivian said, standing. But fine. Believe what you want. I have 14 more calls to make before the rehearsal dinner tonight. She left the room, her spine straight and rigid. Sarah looked at Evan with wide eyes. I think she's really stressed, Sarah whispered. Yeah, Evan agreed, guilt settling in his chest. I think I just made it worse. The rehearsal dinner was held at an exclusive restaurant that Eleanor had rented out entirely, filled with family Evan had never met, and business associates who looked at him like they were trying to solve an equation. Marcus was there, of course, watching everything with predatory interest. Evan played his role perfectly. Attentive fiancé, charming to the relatives, deferential to Eleanor while still showing backbone. He held Vivian's hand, pulled out her chair, made all the right gestures. But there was distance between them now, a careful space that hadn't been there before. Vivian felt it too, he could tell. She smiled at the right moments, said all the right things, but her eyes were guarded, her touch mechanical rather than natural. Trouble in paradise? Marcus murmured, appearing at Evan's elbow during cocktail hour while Vivian was occupied with a cluster of board members. You two seem a bit stiff tonight. Pre-wedding jitters, Evan said smoothly. It's a big day tomorrow. Is it? Marcus swirled his scotch. Because from where I'm standing, it looks more like two people going through the motions of a script they're tired of performing. Your imagination is working overtime, Evan said, his jaw tight. Maybe, Marcus agreed. Or maybe I'm just good at reading people. You know what I think? I think you actually started to believe the lie, started to feel something real. And now reality is crashing back in, reminding you that this is all just a transaction. Must be difficult, pretending to love someone when they're fundamentally incapable of loving you back. Evan's hand clenched around his glass. You don't know anything about what's between us. Don't I? Marcus smiled. I know Vivian. I've known her my whole life. She's brilliant, strategic, absolutely ruthless when necessary. But love? Vulnerability? Those require giving up control, and Vivian would rather die than surrender control. Whatever you think is growing between you, it's an illusion. She's using you, just like she uses everyone. The only question is whether you'll realize it before or after the wedding. Marcus walked away, leaving Evan standing there with poison in his ears and doubt creeping through his veins. He looked across the room at Vivian, watched her navigate conversations with practiced ease, never letting the mask slip. Was Marcus right? Was everything Evan thought he'd seen, the vulnerability in the garden, the genuine laughter with Sarah, the way she'd kissed him like she meant it, was all of it just another performance? You look troubled, a voice said. Evan turned to find Eleanor beside him, her sharp eyes missing nothing. Wedding day nerves? Something like that, Evan said carefully. Eleanor studied him for a long moment. You know, I was opposed to this marriage initially, the speed of it, the circumstances. But watching you with my daughter these past weeks, I've revised my opinion. Evan blinked, surprised. You have? She looks at you differently than she's looked at anyone, Eleanor said. Oh, she's trying to hide it, and she's very good at hiding things. But I'm her mother. I know when she's fighting herself. She paused, sipping her wine. The question is, are you fighting yourself too? I don't know what you mean, Evan said, deflecting. Yes, you do, Eleanor said. You're wondering if this is real, if she's capable of feeling what you're feeling, if you're a fool for caring about someone who might be using you. She smiled, but it was sad around the edges. My husband did that to her, you know. Taught her that emotions were weakness, that vulnerability was failure. He meant to make her strong, but what he actually did was teach her to fear the very things that make us human. Why are you telling me this? Evan asked. Because tomorrow you're marrying my daughter, Eleanor said. And despite my many flaws as a mother, I want her to be happy. I think you could make her happy, if she lets you, but she won't let you if she thinks you're going to leave the moment things get difficult. Vivian needs someone who'll stay, someone who'll fight through her defenses instead of accepting them at face value. What if Marcus is right? Evan asked quietly. What if she's incapable of letting anyone in? Then you'll have tried, Eleanor said simply. But I don't think Marcus is right. I think my daughter is terrified because for the first time in her life, she feels something she can't control. And Vivian hates not being in control. She patted his arm. Give her time and patience, and don't let Marcus poison what you're building. She walked away, leaving Evan reeling. Could it be true? Was Vivian's distance tonight not rejection, but fear? Was Marcus's poison actually evidence of a threat Marcus perceived, that this fake marriage might become real enough to undermine his plans? Evan found Vivian on the restaurant's terrace, standing alone in the cold evening air without a coat. She was staring at the city lights, her arms wrapped around herself, looking smaller somehow than she did in boardrooms. You'll freeze out here, Evan said, shrugging off his jacket and draping it over her shoulders. I needed air, Vivian said. Too many people in there, too many expectations. Your mother just told me an interesting story, Evan said, leaning against the railing beside her. About your father, about why you are the way you are. Vivian's jaw tightened. Whatever she said, it doesn't excuse anything. I made choices. I became this person. She thinks you're scared, Evan said. Not cold, scared. She doesn't know me as well as she thinks, Vivian said, but there was no conviction in it. I think she does, Evan said gently. I think you're terrified because this thing between us stopped being fake somewhere along the way, and you don't know how to handle that. Vivian turned to face him, her expression fierce. You want to know why I'm scared? Because tomorrow I'm marrying you for all the wrong reasons, and somewhere in the middle of this mess, I started wishing the reasons were right. I started wanting this to be real, and that's, her voice cracked, that's the most dangerous thing I could possibly feel. Why is it dangerous? Evan asked, his heart hammering. Because wanting things makes you weak, Vivian said. Needing people makes you vulnerable. And when you're vulnerable, people hurt you, they leave. They prove that you were right all along to keep them at a distance. I'm not going to leave, Evan said. You say that now, Vivian said. But what happens when you realize I'm exactly what Marcus said? Cold, controlling, incapable of giving you what you deserve. What happens when you wake up and realize you married someone who doesn't know how to love properly? Then I'll teach you, Evan said simply. The same way you've been teaching me that security and stability aren't weaknesses. We'll figure it out together. Vivian's eyes glistened. You can't mean that. You barely know me. I know you get up before dawn to answer emails so your employees never feel neglected, Evan said. I know you memorized Sarah's favorite foods and made sure the kitchen was stocked with them. I know you laugh at bad jokes when you think no one's listening. I know you're kind when you think kindness won't be used against you. He stepped closer. I know you're scared, Vivian, but I'm scared too, and maybe that's okay. Maybe we're supposed to be scared together. This is insane, Vivian whispered. We had a plan. A contract, rules. Plans change, Evan said. And maybe our plan was wrong from the start. Maybe we were so busy protecting ourselves that we didn't realize we were building something real. Evan, Vivian started, but whatever she was going to say was interrupted by the terrace door opening. Marcus stood there, his phone in his hand, his expression triumphant. Sorry to interrupt this touching moment, but I think you should know I have everything I need. Security footage, financial records, testimony from Jennifer. I'm presenting it all to the board Monday morning. This wedding won't change anything. By Tuesday, everyone will know this marriage is a sham, and Vivian, you'll be removed from leadership. Vivian's face went white. Evan felt his world tilting, everything they'd built about to come crashing down. But before he could speak, before he could defend or deny, Vivian did something that shocked them both. She started laughing. Not hysterical laughter, but genuine amusement, rich and full. Marcus's triumphant expression faltered. What's so funny? He demanded. You are, Vivian said, wiping her eyes. You spent weeks investigating us, Marcus. Weeks gathering evidence of our financial arrangements, our suspicious timeline, all the ways this relationship doesn't fit your narrow definition of love. And you know what you missed? The actual truth. Which is, Marcus said coldly, that I don't care anymore, Vivian said, her voice steady and certain. You're right. This marriage started as a transaction. Evan needed money. I needed a husband. We made a deal. All of that is true, and I'm done pretending otherwise. Vivian, Evan started, panic rising, but Vivian held up her hand, her eyes never leaving Marcus. You can present your evidence. You can tell the board everything. You can expose every clause of our contract. And you know what will happen? Absolutely nothing. The board will remove you, Marcus said, but he sounded less certain now. Will they? Vivian smiled, but it wasn't pleasant. I've been CEO for 7 years, Marcus. 7 years of record growth, employee satisfaction, innovation. The company has never been stronger. The board cares about results, not romance. As long as I'm legally married by the deadline father set, the terms of the will are satisfied. How I got married is irrelevant. Mother won't, Marcus tried. Mother already knows, Vivian said, and both men stared at her. You think she didn't investigate? You think a woman who built her life on reading people didn't see exactly what this was from day one? She knew, Marcus. She's always known. Marcus's face went red. If she knew, why didn't she stop it? Because unlike you, she cares more about the company than about scoring points against me, Vivian said. Because she knew that whether Evan and I started as a business arrangement or not, we'd either make it work or we wouldn't. But at least I was taking action instead of hiding behind Father's ghost. She stepped forward. You want to expose us? Go ahead. You'll look like the jealous brother trying to undermine his sister's happiness. You'll look petty and desperate. And the board will see exactly what you are. A man willing to destroy the company just to satisfy his ego. You're bluffing, Marcus said, but his voice wavered. Am I? Vivian pulled out her phone, typed something, and held it up. On the screen was a message thread with Eleanor dated 3 weeks ago. In it, Vivian had laid out the entire arrangement, the contract, the timeline, everything. Eleanor's response was simple. Do what you must. Just don't let Marcus win. Marcus stared at the phone, his face cycling through emotions. Shock, anger, betrayal. Mother knew and said nothing? She said quite a lot, actually, Vivian said. She said marriage is complicated, that how it starts matters less than how it continues. She said if I was smart enough to find a good man willing to help me protect Father's legacy, I should hold on to him. She said, Vivian's voice softened, that sometimes the best relationships start without love and build toward it, rather than starting with passion and burning out. This is, Marcus was sputtering now, this is insane. You can't just, but I can, Vivian said. And I am. Tomorrow I'm marrying Evan, not because a contract says I have to, though that's still legally binding. Not because I'm desperate to keep you from the CEO position, though I am. I'm marrying him because somewhere in the middle of this mess I fell in love with him, and that terrifies me more than anything you could possibly threaten me with. The silence that followed was absolute. Marcus stared at Vivian like he'd never seen her before. Evan's heart was hammering so hard he thought everyone must hear it. Had she just said, "You're lying," Marcus said weakly. "You're incapable of love." "So I thought too," Vivian said. "Turns out I was wrong. Turns out love isn't something you control or plan for. It just happens, even when you're trying very hard to prevent it." She looked at Evan, her eyes bright with tears she was finally letting fall. "Especially when you're trying to prevent it." Marcus made a disgusted sound and stormed back inside, leaving them alone on the terrace again. Vivian turned to Evan, vulnerable in a way he'd never seen. "I meant what I said," she whispered. "Every word. I know this isn't what we agreed to. I know it complicates everything, but I'm tired of lying, Evan. Tired of pretending I don't feel what I feel. If you want to back out, if this is too much—" Evan kissed her, not for cameras, not for performance, not to convince anyone of anything. He kissed her because she was crying, because she'd just declared her feelings in front of her worst enemy, because she was brave and terrified, and choosing vulnerability despite every instinct screaming at her to run. When they finally broke apart, Vivian was crying in earnest now, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted. "I don't know how to be someone's partner without a contract spelling out the terms. I don't know how to let someone in without protecting myself first." "Then we'll learn together," Evan said, echoing his earlier words. "We'll make mistakes. We'll mess up. But we'll do it honestly, without scripts or performance. Just two people trying to build something real from a foundation that started fake." "That's the worst plan I've ever heard," Vivian said, but she was smiling through her tears. "Maybe," Evan agreed. "But it's our plan. Not Marcus's, not your father's, not what anyone else thinks we should be. Just ours." Vivian leaned her forehead against his chest, and Evan wrapped his arms around her, feeling her shake with the release of years of carefully maintained control. They stood like that for a long time, two people who'd started as strangers, become reluctant partners, and somehow found their way to something that looked a lot like love. When they finally went back inside, the dinner was breaking up. Eleanor caught Evan's eye across the room and gave him a small nod. Approval, acknowledgement, maybe even pride. Marcus was nowhere to be seen, probably licking his wound somewhere private. Sarah was yawning, ready for bed. "Can we go home?" she asked, and Evan noticed she'd said home, not the penthouse. Somewhere in the past month, that sterile space had become home. "Yeah, princess," Evan said, lifting her into his arms, even though she was getting too big for it. "Let's go home." In the car, Vivian reached across and took Evan's hand, threading their fingers together. No performance this time, just connection, simple and genuine. Sarah noticed, watching from the back seat with quiet wisdom. "You really love her, don't you, Daddy?" she said sleepily. Evan looked at Vivian, who was watching him with those dark eyes that no longer seemed cold but warm, open, vulnerable. "Yeah, princess," he said softly. "I really do." Vivian's hand tightened on his, and though she didn't say the words, Evan saw them in her expression, in the way she looked at him like he was something precious and terrifying and worth fighting for. Tomorrow they would stand in front of 200 people and make promises. But tonight, on the drive back to the city with his daughter dozing and the woman he loved beside him, Evan realized the most important promises had already been made, not in contracts or ceremonies, but in quiet moments of choosing truth over convenience, vulnerability over control. The wedding would be a formality. What they had built, what they were still building, was already real, and somehow that was enough. The morning of the wedding arrived with unseasonable warmth, the kind of perfect spring day that felt like the universe was offering its approval. Evan woke early, his heart already racing despite having slept better than he had in weeks. For the first time since signing that contract, he wasn't waking up to perform a role. He was waking up to marry a woman he actually loved, complications and all. He found Vivian already awake, standing at the living room window in her robe, coffee cup cradled in both hands. She turned when she heard him, and the smile that crossed her face was unguarded, genuine. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked. "Too much thinking," Evan admitted, pouring his own coffee and joining her at the window. The city was just beginning to wake, delivery trucks making their rounds, early joggers on the streets below. "Second thoughts?" "About 100 of them," Vivian said, but there was no fear in her voice. "Most of them variations on the same theme. How did I get so lucky that you didn't run screaming when you saw who I really am?" "I could ask the same question," Evan said. "I came to you broke, desperate, with a daughter and enough baggage to fill a warehouse. You could have chosen anyone. Instead, you chose the guy who couldn't even afford his own suit." "I chose the guy who loved his daughter more than his pride," Vivian corrected, "who worked 3 jobs to try to make ends meet, who never once complained or played the victim. I chose someone with integrity, Evan. Everything else was just details." Before Evan could respond, Sarah's door opened and she emerged, already dressed in her flower girl outfit, a lavender dress that Vivian had insisted on getting her, complete with a crown of flowers Margaret had helped her make the day before. "Do I look okay?" Sarah asked, twirling nervously. "You look beautiful," Vivian said, and the emotion in her voice made Sarah beam. Over the past month, Vivian had been so careful with Sarah, never overstepping, always deferring to Evan on parenting decisions. But slowly, imperceptibly, she'd become someone Sarah sought out for comfort, for advice, for the small moments that built relationships. "Are you nervous about today?" Sarah asked Vivian. "Terrified," Vivian admitted, crouching down to Sarah's level. "But the good kind of terrified, like when you're about to do something wonderful but scary." "Like when I started at my new school," Sarah said. "Exactly like that," Vivian said. "And you were so brave then. You just walked in and made friends and became yourself. I'm trying to do the same thing." Sarah considered this, then threw her arms around Vivian's neck in an impulsive hug. Vivian froze for just a second. She still wasn't used to casual physical affection, then wrapped her arms around the little girl, closing her eyes against the emotion that threatened to overwhelm her. "I'm glad Daddy's marrying you," Sarah whispered. "You make him smile again." Evan had to look away, his throat tight. This was what he'd been protecting when he signed that contract, his daughter's happiness, her future, her security. But somehow he'd gotten so much more. He'd gotten a partner who was learning to be soft, a relationship that was teaching him that vulnerability wasn't weakness, a family that was choosing each other every day. The drive to the estate was filled with Sarah's excited chatter about the ceremony, about seeing Jennifer, who would be there despite everything, about the cake that Eleanor had ordered from some famous bakery in the city. Vivian held Evan's hand the entire drive, her thumb tracing absent circles on his palm, a gesture so natural now that neither of them thought about it. When they arrived, the estate was transformed. White flowers everywhere. Ivory? Not white, Evan noticed with amusement. Flowing fabric draped between trees, chairs arranged in perfect rows facing the garden where they'd stood just days ago, where Marcus had threatened them and Vivian had chosen truth. Eleanor met them at the guest house, looking elegant in dove gray, her expression softer than Evan had ever seen it. "Vivian, darling, you need to get ready," she said. "The stylist is waiting. And Evan, your groomsmen are in the main house." Evan blinked. "Groomsmen? I took the liberty," Vivian said. "A few of your colleagues from the office, Thomas from legal, Michael, your lawyer, they all agreed to stand with you." "You did that?" Evan asked, touched by the gesture. You needed people in your corner, Vivian said simply. Besides, Marcus will have his friends. It seemed only fair you had yours. She kissed him quickly, then disappeared into the guest house with Eleanor and Sarah. Evan stood there for a moment, processing the thoughtfulness of it, the way Vivian had anticipated a need he hadn't even articulated. In the main house, he found Thomas and Michael along with two other men from the office he'd become friendly with over the past month. They greeted him with congratulations and gentle ribbing about cold feet, but underneath it all was genuine warmth. These were good men, and somehow Vivian had known exactly who to ask. She must really love you, Thomas said as they got ready, adjusting ties and cufflinks in the mirror. Vivian Cross doesn't do anything halfway. When she commits completely. I'm starting to understand that, Evan said, fumbling with his boutonniere until Michael took over with practiced hands. For what it's worth, Michael said quietly, I've reviewed a lot of contracts in my career. That first one you signed, it was generous but clinical. The prenup she had me draw up last week? That's a document written by someone protecting their partner, not themselves. She's securing your future, and Sarah's future independent of what happens with the company or the marriage. That's not strategy, that's love. Evan hadn't known about a new prenup. The fact that Vivian had done it without fanfare, without seeking credit, made his chest tighten with emotion. The ceremony was scheduled for 3 p.m. At 2:45, Evan took his position at the altar with the officiant, looking out at the assembled guests. 200 people, most of them strangers to him, Vivian's business associates, Cross Industries board members, distant relatives of the Cross family. But in the front row sat Jennifer and David, and Jennifer gave him a small nod that felt like forgiveness, or at least understanding. The music started. Sarah came down the aisle first, scattering flower petals with serious concentration, her flower crown slightly askew. She took her place to the side, giving Evan a thumbs up that made several guests chuckle. Then Vivian appeared, and Evan's breath caught. She wore a simple gown, elegant and understated, her hair loose around her shoulders in soft waves. No veil, no excessive drama, just Vivian looking more beautiful than he'd ever seen her. But it wasn't the dress or the styling that made his heart stutter. It was her expression, open, nervous, real. She wasn't wearing her mask. She was just herself, walking toward him with her mother on one arm and tears already threatening to fall. Eleanor delivered Vivian to the altar, kissed her daughter's cheek, and whispered something that made Vivian laugh through her tears. Then she took her seat, and it was just Evan and Vivian standing face to face while the officiant began speaking words Evan barely heard over the pounding of his heart. I understand you've written your own vows, the officiant said, and Evan nodded. They hadn't rehearsed this part, hadn't even discussed what they would say. Vivian went first, pulling a small card from somewhere in her dress, her hands shaking slightly. Evan, she began, her voice steadier than her hands. When we started this, I thought I had everything figured out. I thought love was a weakness, that control was safety, that needing someone made you vulnerable. You've spent the last month proving me wrong about everything. She paused, blinking back tears. You've taught me that vulnerability isn't weakness, it's courage. That needing someone doesn't make you less, it makes you human. That love isn't about control or contracts or keeping score. It's about choosing someone every day, especially when they're difficult and scared and don't know how to accept love properly. Several people in the audience were already crying. Eleanor was dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. Even Thomas was looking suspiciously emotional. I'm not good at this, Vivian continued. At being open, at trusting, at believing that good things can last. But I want to try. With you. For you. Because you see past the Ice Queen reputation and the boardroom persona to whoever I am underneath all that armor. And you like her, maybe even love her. That's the most terrifying and wonderful thing anyone's ever given me. She tucked the card away, looking at him with those dark eyes now swimming with tears. So I promise to keep trying, to keep choosing vulnerability over control, to keep letting you in even when every instinct tells me to close off, to be the partner you deserve and the mother figure Sarah needs and the woman I've been too scared to be. I promise to love you, not perfectly, Because I don't know how to do anything perfectly when it comes to emotions, but honestly, completely. For as long as you'll have me. Evan's vision blurred. He hadn't prepared a card, hadn't written anything down because he'd thought he would be delivering carefully crafted words to sell an illusion. But standing here now, with Vivian crying openly and 200 people watching, he just spoke from the heart. Vivian, he said, his voice rough with emotion, a month ago I was broke, desperate, and out of options. You offered me a lifeline, and I took it because I would have done anything to protect my daughter. I thought I was signing up for a business arrangement, a year of pretending in exchange for security. And I was okay with that because at least Sarah would be safe. He reached out, taking both her hands in his. But you weren't what I expected. You were supposed to be cold, distant, impossible to connect with. Instead, you were kind to my daughter. You were patient with me. You made coffee every morning, even though you never drank the first cup because you always poured a second one for me. You memorized Sarah's favorite bedtime stories. You fought against your own instincts every single day to try to be more open, more present, more real. Vivian let out a wet laugh, squeezing his hands. I don't have a fancy speech prepared, Evan continued. I don't have poetic words or grand promises. What I have is this. I see you, the real you, not the CEO or the Ice Queen or the untouchable Vivian Cross. I see the woman who's scared of being hurt, who works herself to exhaustion because achievement is the only kind of love she learned growing up, who wants desperately to be good enough but doesn't believe she ever will be. And I love that woman, not despite her flaws, but including them. He could see people crying now, not just Eleanor, but half the guests. Even some of the stern board members were looking misty-eyed. So I promise to keep reminding you that you're enough, Evan said, to catch you when you fall. And you will fall because we all do. To love Sarah with you. To build a family with you, to mess up alongside you. I promise that when you wake up scared in the middle of the night, convinced this is too good to be true, I'll be there to remind you it's real. We're real. And we're choosing this, choosing each other, not because a contract says we should, but because we want to. The officiant had to clear his throat several times before he could continue. The exchange of rings was almost perfunctory after that emotional devastation. Evan slipped the platinum band onto Vivian's finger with shaking hands. She did the same for him, the ring he'd been wearing for weeks now joined by a matching band that felt heavier, more significant, because this time it meant something. By the power vested in me, the officiant said, his voice thick with emotion, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride. Evan pulled Vivian close, and when their lips met, it was different from every other kiss they'd shared. This one was a promise, a beginning, a declaration in front of everyone that mattered that this was real, they were real, and nothing, not Marcus's schemes or Eleanor's doubts or their own fears, could take that away from them. The reception was a blur of congratulations, champagne, and dancing. Sarah was in her element, charming every adult she encountered, proudly telling everyone that her daddy married Vivian, and now they were a real family. Jennifer pulled Evan aside during a quiet moment, her expression complex. I was wrong, she said simply. About you, about her, about this. I thought you were being reckless. But watching you two today, that's real, Evan. Whatever it started as, it's real now. I know, Evan said. I'm sorry I wasn't honest from the beginning. You were protecting Sarah, Jennifer said. I get it. And for what it's worth, she's thriving, happier than I've seen her since before the divorce. You did that, you and Vivian together. She smiled, sad but genuine. I'm withdrawing the custody motion. Sarah belongs with you. Just promise me you'll let me be part of her life? Always, Evan said, hugging his ex-wife with genuine affection. Thank you for understanding. Marcus appeared halfway through dinner, looking uncomfortable in his formal wear and defeated in a way Evan had never seen. He approached their table where Vivian was laughing at something Sarah had said, her hand resting casually on Evan's knee under the table. Vivian, Marcus said stiffly, could I speak with you? Vivian tensed, but Evan squeezed her hand and she relaxed slightly. Of course. They stepped away from the reception, out into the garden where fairy lights now twinkled in the gathering dusk. Evan watched through the windows, ready to intervene if needed, but also trusting Vivian to handle her brother. I was wrong, Marcus said, the words clearly painful. About you, about this. I thought. He shook his head. It doesn't matter what I thought. I was wrong. Yes, you were, Vivian said, no softness in her voice. You tried to destroy something beautiful because you couldn't stand that I might actually be happy. Because if I could have both the company and a real relationship, what did that say about you? Marcus flinched. I don't expect you to forgive me. Good, Vivian said. Because I don't. Not yet. Maybe not ever. You've spent years undermining me, Marcus. Years trying to prove I'm not fit to lead. Today was just the culmination of that campaign. I know, Marcus said quietly. And I'm withdrawing from the company. Effective immediately. I've already submitted my resignation to the board. Vivian's eyes widened. You're quitting? Mother helped me see some things, Marcus said, about who I've become, what I've prioritized. I don't like that person, Vivian, and I don't want to spend the rest of my life trying to tear down someone who's only ever tried to do the right thing. He paused. For what it's worth, he's good for you. Evan, he makes you more human, less like father and more like you should have been allowed to be all along. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't redemption, but it was acknowledgement, and that was something. Vivian nodded slowly. I hope you find whatever you're looking for, she said, away from Cross Industries, away from this family's expectations. Maybe away from me, you'll figure out who Marcus actually is. Maybe, Marcus agreed. He held out his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Vivian shook it. Not a reconciliation, but a truce. Marcus left the reception shortly after, and Vivian returned to Evan's side, sliding into her chair and immediately reaching for his hand. Everything okay? Evan asked. Everything's perfect, Vivian said, and for the first time she seemed to actually believe it. The dancing started as the sun set. Evan and Vivian's first dance was to a song Vivian had chosen, something slow and romantic that fit the moment perfectly. As they swayed together, Vivian's head resting on Evan's shoulder, she whispered, Thank you. For what? Evan asked. For not giving up on me, Vivian said. For seeing past the walls I built. For loving me even when I didn't know how to love you back. You always knew how, Evan said. You just didn't trust it. They danced with Sarah between them, the three of them laughing and spinning until Sarah was dizzy. They danced with Eleanor, who surprised everyone by being warm and even funny once she'd had enough champagne. They danced until their feet hurt and the last guests were leaving and the staff was cleaning up around them. Finally, as midnight approached, they retreated to the guest house, now their wedding night sanctuary, with Sarah already asleep in Margaret's care back at the penthouse. Alone for the first time as husband and wife, the weight of the day settled over them. So we're really married, Evan said, loosening his tie and collapsing onto the couch. Completely, legally, irrevocably married, Vivian agreed, kicking off her heels with a groan of relief. No more contracts, no more pretending, just this. Just this, Evan echoed. Are you scared? Terrified, Vivian admitted, sitting beside him and curling into his side like it was the most natural thing in the world, but also happier than I've been in my entire life. Is that normal, to be both at once? I think so, Evan said, wrapping his arm around her. I think maybe that's what real love is, being scared of losing something because it matters so much. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the lights of the estate gradually dim as staff finished their work and departed. It had been a day of impossible perfection, the kind you couldn't plan for because real emotion didn't follow scripts. What happens now? Vivian asked quietly. After this? After the honeymoon period ends and real life sets in. After the novelty wears off and we're just two people trying to make a life together. Then we keep choosing each other, Evan said. Every day. In the boring moments and the hard moments and the moments when we want to kill each other because I leave my socks on the floor and you reorganize the kitchen cabinets without telling me where anything is. Vivian laughed, the sound warm and unguarded. I do that, don't I? You do, Evan confirmed, and it drives me crazy, but I love you anyway, maybe even because of it, because your need for order is part of who you are, and I love who you are. Even the difficult parts? Vivian asked. Especially the difficult parts, Evan said. They make the easy parts sweeter. 3 months later, Evan stood in the kitchen of the penthouse making pancakes while Sarah set the table and Vivian reviewed reports at the counter, one hand absently rubbing her coffee cup, the other reaching out to touch Evan's back whenever he passed by. It was a Sunday morning, unremarkable and perfect in its ordinariness. "Daddy, can Vivian come to my school thing on Friday?" Sarah asked. "They're doing presentations about families and I want to talk about all of us." Evan glanced at Vivian, whose expression had gone soft in the way it always did when Sarah included her. She still wasn't completely comfortable with the mother figure role, but she was trying, and Sarah adored her for it. "Of course I'll come," Vivian said. "I wouldn't miss it." "Even though you have that board meeting?" Sarah asked, because she paid attention to everything. "The board can wait," Vivian said firmly. "You're more important." Sarah beamed, and Evan felt his heart swell. This was what he'd been fighting for. Not the money or the security, though those mattered. This. The three of them together, building something real from a foundation that had started false. Later that week, Evan overheard Vivian on the phone with Eleanor, discussing company strategy but also asking for advice about Sarah's upcoming birthday party. The relationship between mother and daughter had thawed considerably, both of them working to build something better than what they'd had. "She's doing well," Eleanor said during one of her visits, watching Vivian and Sarah work on a puzzle together. "Softer, more open. I hardly recognize her as the same girl who used to sit ramrod straight at family dinners, terrified of saying the wrong thing." "She's still terrified sometimes," Evan said honestly, "but she's learning that being scared doesn't mean you have to be alone." "You're good for her," Eleanor said, "and that little girl is a miracle." The way she just accepted Vivian, no questions asked. Children have a way of seeing past defenses to the truth underneath. "Sarah knew Vivian loved her before Vivian did," Evan said. "She told me one morning that Vivian had the same look in her eyes that I did when I was worried about her. She said it meant Vivian cared even if she didn't know how to show it." Eleanor wiped at her eyes. "That child is wise beyond her years." 2 years later, Evan found Vivian standing at the living room window again, but this time she wasn't alone. She held a tiny bundle in her arms, James Evan Cross, 3 days old, and already clearly his mother's son based on the way he gripped her finger with determined strength. "Can't sleep?" Evan asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around both of them. "He's too beautiful," Vivian said, her voice thick with emotion. "Every time I put him down, I want to pick him back up." "Is that normal?" "Completely normal," Evan assured her. "I was the same way with Sarah." Sarah appeared in her doorway, now 10 years old and already showing signs of the woman she'd become, confident, kind, certain of her place in this family. "Is James crying?" she asked sleepily. "No, Mom just can't put him down," Evan said, the word mom slipping out naturally. Vivian had asked Sarah if she could use it 6 months ago, her voice shaking with vulnerability, and Sarah had thrown her arms around Vivian's neck and whispered yes, like it was the greatest gift she'd ever received. "Let me hold him," Sarah said, and Vivian carefully transferred her son to his sister, both of them settling on the couch together while Evan and Vivian watched. "We made this," Vivian said softly, gesturing at the scene before them. "We took something false and made it real. We took a business arrangement and built a family." "You sound surprised," Evan said, pulling her close. "I am surprised," Vivian admitted, "every single day. I wake up and you're still here. Sarah still loves me. James exists, this life exists, and I keep waiting for it to disappear, to find out it was too good to be true." "It's real," Evan promised, the same promise he'd been making for 2 years. "We're real. This family is real, and it's not going anywhere." 5 years after the wedding, Evan stood in the Cross Industries boardroom watching Vivian present the annual report to unanimous approval. She'd been CEO for 12 years now, had doubled the company's value, had implemented policies that made it one of the best places to work in the city. She was brilliant and strategic and exactly as formidable as she'd always been. But now, when she finished her presentation, she caught his eye across the room and smiled. Not the practice smile of a CEO, but the real smile of a woman who knew she'd get to go home to her family. Who knew that her worth wasn't measured in profits or board approval, but in pancake breakfasts and homework help, and the million small moments that made a life. After the meeting, they walked to his office. He'd been promoted to VP of Special Projects, a role that perfectly suited his analytical mind and his talent for seeing patterns others missed. Sarah's drawing hung on his wall, a family portrait she'd made when she was 8. In it, 3 stick figures held hands, and the word home was written in careful block letters above them. "Remember when you thought this was impossible?" Evan asked, gesturing at the drawing. "The 3 of us as a real family?" "I remember thinking a lot of impossible things," Vivian said, sliding into his lap despite the glass walls and the possibility of being seen. She'd gotten so much better at not caring what people thought, at prioritizing what mattered over what looked proper. "I thought I was incapable of love, thought vulnerability was weakness, thought happy endings were for other people." "And now?" Evan asked, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Now I know that the best things start impossible," Vivian said. "They start with a desperate decision and a clinical contract and 2 people who don't know each other trying to solve separate problems. And then, if you're very lucky and very brave, they become real. They become home." "Is that what this is?" Evan asked. "Home?" "Your home," Vivian said simply. "You and Sarah and James and the life we've built. Not the penthouse or the company or any of the external things, just us. Together. Choosing each other every day, especially when it's hard." That evening, the whole family gathered for dinner, a weekly tradition they'd maintained religiously. Eleanor was there, along with Jennifer and David and their new son. The table was loud and chaotic, with Sarah helping James with his food while the adults talked and laughed, and occasionally had to mediate disputes over who got the last dinner roll. "Can you believe this started with a contract?" Jennifer said during a quiet moment, watching Vivian patiently explain to James why he couldn't have dessert before finishing his vegetables. "Honestly, no," Evan admitted. "I thought I was signing up for a year of pretending. Instead, I got a lifetime of real." "She's good for you," Jennifer said. "You're more yourself now than you were when we were married. Happier. More settled." "She taught me that needing someone isn't weakness," Evan said. "That accepting help doesn't make you less of a man or a father. That sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit you can't do it alone." "And what did you teach her?" Jennifer asked. Evan looked at Vivian, who was now laughing at something James had said, her face lit up with genuine joy. That she deserved to be loved for who she is, not what she achieves. That vulnerability isn't failure. That sometimes the riskiest thing you can do is let someone in. Years passed. Sarah graduated high school with honors, got into MIT on a full scholarship, funded partially by her trust fund but mostly by her own merit. James started kindergarten, already showing signs of his mother's strategic mind and his father's empathy. The penthouse slowly transformed from a sterile showpiece into a real home, marked by family photos and Sarah's artwork and James's toy collection. Vivian continued leading Cross Industries with brilliance, but now she left the office at 6 p.m. every day, delegated more, trusted her team. She'd learned that the company would survive without her constant attention, but her family needed her present in ways that mattered more than quarterly profits. Evan had published 2 books on financial ethics, taught part-time at the business school, and still worked at Cross Industries in a role that let him influence policy without drowning in corporate politics. He'd found his place, his purpose, his voice. And through it all, the triumphs and challenges, the sleepless nights with sick children, and the celebrations of promotions and graduations, they chose each other every single day. Not because a contract obligated them to, but because they wanted to. Because what they'd built together was worth fighting for. On their 10th anniversary, Vivian surprised Evan by taking him back to the estate where they'd married, where they'd first kissed for real, where everything had changed. "Why here?" Evan asked as they stood in the garden, now overgrown and wild since Eleanor had moved to a smaller place in the city. "Because this is where I stopped pretending," Vivian said. "Where I chose truth over control. Where I realized that loving you was scarier than anything Marcus could threaten me with, but also the only thing that mattered." "I remember," Evan said, pulling her close. "You told Marcus to expose us. You chose honesty even though it could have cost you everything." "It did cost me everything," Vivian said. "Everything I thought mattered. The perfect control, the flawless reputation, the certainty that I could handle anything alone. But in exchange, I got something infinitely better. I got you. I got us. I got a family I didn't know I needed and a life that's messy and unpredictable and absolutely perfect. Not perfect, Evan corrected gently. We fight about whose turn it is to do dishes. James went through a phase where he only wanted you and cried whenever I tried to put him to bed. Sarah still resents that we didn't tell her the truth from the beginning about how we met. Okay, not perfect, Vivian agreed, smiling, but perfectly ours. Built from lies and contracts and desperate choices, but real anyway. Maybe more real because we had to work so hard to get here. They stood in the garden as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Somewhere in the city, their children were with Eleanor, probably eating too much sugar and staying up too late. Tomorrow they'd go back to real life, work and school, and the million obligations that filled their days. But tonight, in the place where their story had turned real, they were just Evan and Vivian, not CEO and VP, not parents or children or people with roles to play. Just two people who'd taken the biggest risk of their lives and found that sometimes the impossible becomes possible when you're brave enough to choose it. Thank you, Vivian said softly. For what? Evan asked, though he'd heard variations of this gratitude 1,000 times. For seeing me, Vivian said, for staying when I gave you every reason to leave, for teaching me that love isn't something you control or earn, it's something you choose, every day. In the boring moments and the hard moments and the moments when nothing makes sense. You taught me the same thing, Evan said, that security isn't just about money, it's about having someone who chooses you back, who sees your flaws and loves you anyway, who builds a life with you one imperfect day at a time. They kissed as the stars came out, as the night settled around them, as the garden that had witnessed their beginning held space for their celebration of everything they'd become. When asked years later how their love story began, they would smile at each other with the shared knowledge of people who'd lived something too complex for simple explanations. It started with a contract, they would say, with desperation and calculation and two people trying to solve separate problems. It started with lies and performance and careful distance. But somewhere along the way, between coffee mornings and late-night confessions, between Sarah's laughter and learning to trust, between masks falling and walls crumbling, it became real. It became love. It became a choice they made every day, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Not a perfect beginning, but a real one. And in the end, that was all that mattered. The choice to keep choosing each other, to keep building, to keep trusting that what they'd created was worth every risk, every fear, every moment of vulnerability, from contract to family, from strangers to partners to lovers, from impossible to inevitable. That was their story, written in moments both grand and small, in the space between who they thought they had to be and who they became when they stopped pretending. And it was, against all odds and expectations, absolutely and perfectly real.